Late here, my apologies. Roll call, Madam Clerk, please.
Councilmember Baldino.
Here.
Councilmember Giroux.
Here.
Councilmember Perstock.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Here.
And Mayor Boyle.
Here. All right, if we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll lead. All right, thank you so much. Again, sorry we're late getting started. That's my fault. I apologize. Public communications. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone here for public communications?
I do not have any cards there.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Procedural motions. Item A, read all ordinances and resolutions on the agenda by title only. Would one of my colleagues please move to do so?
So moved.
All right, do we have a second?
Carol, second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0. All right, staff presentations. Mr. George.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, we are here this afternoon and to present to you in our 2024-25 budget study session. We have a full presentation, obviously by our finance staff. Paul and his team have done a fantastic job putting together a comprehensive look at the upcoming budget. I do want to first thank the council for letting us take your afternoon. Appreciate that. We have a lot to cover. I want to thank Paul and his team. Long process of getting the proposed budget to this point. I want to thank the department heads who have met numerous times with Paul and with myself to get to the numbers that you'll be seeing this afternoon. There's a lot of cleanup matters that you'll see in this budget, and Paul will share some of those with you. Our total general fund budget of just under $100 million is fully balanced. Happy to say that. You'll notice when we go through the capital improvement programs, we were carrying over roughly $24 million in projects, and then we're looking at potentially about $18 million in new capital improvement projects. Just some of the highlights, and again, Paul and his team will get into the dollars and cents and specifics of these, but some of the highlights that we are looking at for the next fiscal year will be a new ERP system. We're actually going to looking to conduct our employee engagement survey. Again, first time in a little over 2 years that we'll go back out and do an employee engagement survey. Out of our community development department, you'll be seeing a general plan land use element update and refresh. Be a big highlight this year. We're also looking at a comprehensive multi-department approach to dealing with homelessness. It's a big topic everywhere in LA County and throughout the state and throughout the country, actually. And we are looking at an effort being spearheaded by a combination of our police and fire departments in the homelessness area. Happy to say that the plunge construction will be fully engaged during this coming fiscal year. As well as we'll be wrapping up and jumping into the complete redesign of the rec park renovation, another big undertaking. And then finally, Elias tells me we are going to finally be able to deliver the monument sign down at Imperial and Main Street. So that'll be another highlight of this year. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul to lead us through the budget study session workshop, and all the department heads are here. As you get into the detailed questions that you might have, they're all ready to answer any questions you may have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Great. Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, City Council, for the afternoon. Budget study sessions, as occurs annually, it takes a lot of time and effort to get to where we are today. As the city manager messaged that we have a balanced budget going into next year. Obviously, during the budget study session, we'll be covering quite a bit of numbers, But also, before I begin, I wanted to turn around and thank everybody in this room and probably some that are not here. It's just a group team effort, packaging the budget together. So I just wanted to really thank everyone that's involved in this budget process. A budget really is a plan, spending plan for next year to really achieve the goals of the community and of course the council's goals for next year. So with that said, let me begin with our presentation. The agenda is really simple. We have really 3 sections. I'll be covering the first section. I'll be covering kind of an overview, just overall revenues, expenditures, and our fund balances, our reserves, where we are at the end of the year for next year. And then we'll go into section 2 will be really department budgets. It'll be specific to each of the individual departments, what's proposed for next year, the various FTE changes and whatnot. And then lastly, we'll cover capital improvements for next year. And just being that I have about 55 slides, it's 15 less than my predecessor, Joe Lilio's last year, so I did condense my slides a little bit here. But if the council has any questions, please jump in and ask. I'll do my best to answer, but of course I can turn to my team, but also the directors as well and their team to answer any of the questions I can't answer. Regards to just a quick budget adoption timeline, the budget really begins in January, and that's when I began. And so I think the following days when I met with my budget team to just kind of figure out the logistics, the timeline, and as the city manager mentioned, the departments got their packets together, packaged it together, met with me for the first round, scrutiny and whatnot of a new CFO, have a bunch of questions, and then we met with the city manager, second round of scrutiny and questions and just kind of cleaning up the budget and getting to where we are today with the proposed budget. And with today, I and my team will take notes regards to any changes that the council or any additions, deletions from what we're proposing to the council. We'll make those changes and come back on June 4th for the budget adoption, which I will have a drafted proposed budget book for your consideration. And with that said, we will begin with numbers. Our overall all funds revenues going into next year is $169.6 million. And that's compared to our adopted revenues at $164 million. As you're aware that the general fund comprises of most or half of these revenues, 57%, and that's at $96.7 million. And I'll go into more detail behind the general fund and what the revenues entail. The enterprise fund, water fund is at 34.6 million, and then the various other restricted funds for revenues going into next year. Going into detail regards to the general fund, as you know, this is our discretionary fund. We have various, of course, general fund taxes that support our operations going into next year. Our overall proposed budget for next year is $96.7 million. When we compare that to our current adopted budget of $88.3 million, that's an increase of 9.5% or $8.4 million. I wanted to take a pause there and let the council know that even though we're expecting a 9.5 increase, that's based upon our adopted budget. Now, the adopted budget had some of the revenue line items are very conservative. And so during mid-year, being that I was new at that time, we didn't adjust any of the revenues. I wanted to see how the year was gonna progress. And now 10 months in, we do have a good picture of what our overall revenues will look like towards June 30th. And we'll be close to $92 million versus the $88.3 million. So the true increase that I'm expecting for next year is a 5% increase, not an 8.5%. And I'll go into additional detail as to what that entails. I wanted to highlight for the council on line 13, the interest rental income. You'll see the biggest increase there at 81% going into next year. That really is a credit to our city treasurer as he put a lot of our idle funds into investments. And these investments have been doing really well. And we do expect $5.2 million anticipated yield to collect for next year, going into next year. So we see strength there. And the next slide,
Mr.
I'll
Chairman,
go into, yes.
Yeah, when you said you're going to get into some of the specifics, Are you gonna go line item by line item on the revenue streams and walk us through the assumptions on those?
I can if you
I
want
would
me to.
appreciate that,
Okay,
yeah,
great,
please.
great.
I don't know if
And-
now's the right time or not, but.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yes, and some of it might connect to the next slide, but I'll go back to the previous slide and just kind of go through each of the line items. As you know, sales tax is our main revenue for general fund. We're expecting $16.1 million. That's actually a growth, even though on the chart it says 9%. That's because it's based on the adopted budget. What we're expecting to end the year is closer to $16 million. I'm sorry, $16 million here. Let me see. I have this chart here. It is close to $16.1 million for next year, but we're anticipating to end the year close to $15.2 million. So you'll see a 5% increase in sales tax. But regards to business license tax, I do want to spend a little bit of time here. We did budget
Sorry,
for.
can we go back on that? So
Yes.
what is the 5% increase based on?
Strictly based on what we met with our consultant, our
Sorry.
HDL consultant that looks into sales tax, looks at overall LA County, how are they doing, and they provide an analysis regards to what's expected for next year. They look at microeconomics, and so they project out. It was close to, I believe they put 5.2%, but we're being a little conservative and put 5% increase.
So
into
is
next
the
year.
answer similar for all of them then? the firm is provide us the information that when we look at these
HDL
different revenue
HDL
streams?
provides us sales tax and property tax assumptions. Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes. Business license tax, as you know, in January was the first year that the business license tax was took in effect. We budgeted $14.3 million to collect this year. We're actually close to $14 million. We're going to end the year a little shy of $14 million next year. I'm sorry, this year. Next year's budget, I'm keeping that relatively flat and want to see overall with chargers coming online, also with some of the corporations, of course, some of the businesses on the east side of town. Headcount is our main driver, and with remote work, we're still trying to see what that outcome looks like, what that impact looks like going into next year. So I took a conservative look on that forecast next year, and I kept it at $14.3 million going into next year. TLT is looking really strong. This year, we budgeted $12.8 million. Next year, I'm budgeting $13.8 million. Now, that's, of course, another conservative budget that was adopted this year, but we're actually close to, I'm trying to remember where I put that number. Let me see. I don't want to make up numbers. 13.2. We're going to be close to 13.2 on TOT. And TOT, we got some data regards to TOT. The overall occupancy rate is currently sitting at 83% occupied, and also room rates are averaging $157 per room. And we do expect that to continue to be strong going into next year. And of course, in the subsequent years with World Cup and Olympics, we do see that revenue source probably be outpacing potentially business license tax in the coming years. Property tax, we do expect a growth in property tax. We budgeted $12.5 million, and I actually believe that that's a good number. We do expect growth in property tax to be close to 9%. That's another area where our consultant HDL provided their input in regards to looking at LA County, how the activity is overall. And of course, that hinges upon what the feds do on their interest rate side. If they do lower their interest rates, then we probably will see more activity on the property being reassessed and sales. But we wanted to be more conservative looking out, and we put it at 9% growth for next year. The Chevron tax resolution agreement, we historically always budgeted $5.5 million for this budget line item. As you know, the TRA has that's really a true-up payment. Whatever net of any of the taxes that Chevron pays us, that budget line item is just a true-up to get to their actual total annual allocation. This year was $15.4 million, Dino? I'm not sure I remember. Yes, it was a little over $15 million. So whatever we don't collect that meets that $15 million, we'll true that payment up that the Chevron will pay us to get to that point, that agreed upon amount. Utility users tax, we do see quite a bit of utility users tax increasing over the past couple of years as rates continue to go up. And also we were a beneficiary of just rates increasing. And so we do expect our utility users tax to increase 10% next year. And Mayor, do you want me to continue just kind of going through all the assumptions? Okay. And then charges for service, that's really driven by our cost for the city to providing the services and the fees that we collect. Most of that comes from the counter, from our community development side. We do assume a 3.4% increase in cost next year, so that revenue is included in there for growth. The transfers in, that's just
Just on that one, so we're
Yes.
assuming more development and an increase.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I spoke with the community development director. He mentioned due to the new RSI implementation of the windows, and we are seeing a big increase in activity on permits, and we do see that into next year.
God, thank
So
you.
we included that in our revenues. Transfers in, that's just a small amount that we do transfers in from non-general fund source into our general fund. Franchise tax, another area that we do anticipate some growth, even though the table shows a 17.9% increase. That budget that was adopted this year at $4.2 million, I felt that was conservative. We were close to $4.4 million by year end. Other revenue sources, these are just the various other revenues that are miscellaneous that we forecast out. We're keeping it relatively flat. I know we're showing a little bit of decrease, but there's a whole analysis in regards to what other revenues are. But we wanted to forecast out what the true picture looks like. We're going to be close to $2.8 million on other revenues. On the intergovernmental revenue, this is really just intergovernmental activity, $205,000 going into next year. License and permits. I misspoke on the charges for service. The community development permits resides under license and permits. That's where you see the bigger activity, and that's why you're seeing a 9% going into next year of $2.4 million next year. Interest and rental income, as I mentioned, our investments are yielding quite a bit of return, so we're reflecting that revenue into next year. And then fines and forfeiture are just a small portion of our general fund at $367,000. We were just forecasting out regards to the activity this year, kind of going into next year and what we're expecting on fines in general.
So then charges for services is only things like our city services for events, as an example, or we're, okay.
Yes.
Why are we forecasting to be 14% higher there?
This was just looking at activity of what we've collected so far this year, and that number of $5 million that was adopted this year was actually a low number. We're closer to $5 million, so we're just reflecting that anticipated increase, which was closer to about 4% increase, even though the adopted budget was low.
Okay, that would still put us at 11% if we're running at about 5 million now, and we're expecting to be at 5.6.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I guess overall, when I look at a 9.5% anticipated increase over the baseline of this year, that doesn't feel conservative to me in a tenuous market where people are uncertain, and we know we've got major issues with commercial office that aren't starting to show yet. They're starting to show because we're hearing from our commercial landowners about what's happening with lease negotiations, but we're not necessarily seeing it in our BLT yet. So, and we're anticipating sales and use tax being up by 9%. So just an observation that I think these are, I won't say aggressive, but I wouldn't call them conservative, in my humble opinion. Thank you.
And absolutely. As I mentioned, because you're comparing to adopted budget, some of that adopted budget was low. If you were to just focus on sales tax, as I mentioned, we're anticipating to exceed that sales tax number and that true growth for sales tax. And I think this next table, this chart will probably paint a better picture in regards to that orange line on top, our sales tax. It's less than what we collected in 22-23. That was that post-pandemic when we saw a big pent-up demand for just overall people coming out and and going to restaurants.
And a lot of
spending-
government surplus funding.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that, yes. And that, of course, went away. And we saw a natural dip, but then we are just progressively seeing an increase. And that increase is, what I'm looking into next year is about close to 5%, not really a 9.5% increase.
I think maybe it would be helpful if you added a column in that previous slide that says, so you have your budget and then you have actuals or anticipated actuals, so we can look at it real comparatively. Because to Drew's point, like, thinking of a 9% increase is, unheard of at this point. But, so I just think that having an extra column there would help.
Absolutely. When I was preparing the slides also, I was using my predecessor, as I didn't want to deviate too much away, but I absolutely agree that moving forward, I'll provide a year-end, not only on the revenue side, but also on the expenditure side, because that discussion will also be kind of part of that, what's expected to grow next year on expenditures, and you'll hear that similar story where we budgeted to conservatively, but the actual expenditure is this, and we'll cover that during the appropriation side
Yeah,
as
I
well.
think that'd be great.
And I'll include that, yes. All right. Well, we're going to go into appropriations or expenditures. So for next year, we are, all funds, we're budgeting $215 million. That's compared to our adopted budget of $195 or $196 million. And half of that, a little less than half, is our general fund. And then there's the subsequent enterprise and restricted funds below that as well. I wanted to highlight a few items here. Line 6, general fund CIP. This year we budgeted 18.6 million, but we're going up to 30.2 million. I wanted to let the council know that that's not just new projects, but that's also carryover projects that are carrying over to next year. And I will provide additional detail regards to what that total number is during the CIP section of the presentation. The next line item, 9.7, you see equipment replacement fund. We budgeted $18.2 million this year, but it's dropping to 9.7. So this is one of those line items that's really a cleanup. This year when we budgeted this 18.2, we actually budgeted the whole equipment replacement fund. We won't be replacing all those equipments. We're actually only going to be replacing, and we're putting aside 9.7. So we're actually correcting this budget to reflect what's truly anticipated to be replaced next year. And then also line 10, the Dev Services Trust. There was $0 budgeted, but we are budgeting $800,000, and that's for the housing element and general plan. That's the community development team is going to be working on going into next year. All right, diving a little deeper into the general fund appropriations by department. Here's the breakout regards to the various increases or decreases from the departments that's proposed for next year. And we'll go into more detail in section 2 or the department budgets, and you'll see these percentages and the detail as to what's going up and down. But I wanted to let the council know that the proposed budget for general fund appropriations for next year is $98.7 million, a little shy of $100 million, versus our adopted budget of $96.1 million. And that's a growth, an expenditure growth of 2.75%. But I do have a subsequent slide to give you additional detail that the true operational increase when we net out line 3, which is the transfers out. If we take that line out, that will give you a true picture of what our true expenditure, operating expenditure increases. That's close to 7.1%. And I'll provide that additional detail to what's triggering that 7.1% increase in our expenditures. Just to break out further in our appropriations of that $98.7 million, that comprises of $57.8 million in personnel costs, 61% of our budget. The M&O budget is $25.5 million, or 27% of our budget. A little portion of that is the capital overlay of $254,000, and lastly, transfers out of $15.2 million. And I'll provide detail as to what that $15.2 million entails in the next 2 slides over. Regards to what I mentioned earlier, regards to getting you the true operational cost when you net out transfers out, you can see that the bottom line, you see a 7.1% increase. And so let me give you additional context to how we get to the increase of 7.1%. So if we go back up to the salaries, our current adopted budget of $36.5 million, we're proposing a $39.8 million increase in salaries, and that's a 9.1% increase. And that increase is really driven by, when we adopted the budget last year, we adopted it in early June, late May. There were some decisions that the council agreed upon in regards to labor negotiations that were done after the budget was adopted, but that budget was never included in the adopted budget. And this year, we didn't include that, but obviously going into next year, I'm including those costs. That's included with the labor negotiations. So that is really what's driving that 9.1% increase in expenditures.
And then just for clarification, what percentage of the FTEs already are locked in on an MOU for next year, and what percentage are not?
Ooh, that's a good question.
So, because the ones that are locked in are known, the known commodity, but what percentage of the FTEs are not, so that we know that that's something that we have to think about?
Gotcha. You know, I would hate to just run numbers in my mind without context and data, but I do know CEA is still under in that period of negotiation. I believe FFA is going to be coming up to renegotiations. So if you just add those two FTs together.
So in this budget, did you anticipate,
No.
so that this is just pure known?
Yes. These are pure known COLA increases, salary adjustments, and also any of the MOUs that were executed that are included in this increase.
Okay,
Yes.
so that number really is not, that's gonna,
It will go up?
it will probably go up.
Yes, yes.
And what's the assumption as far as vacancies on this number? Are we assuming that if we have open positions, they will be filled in the next calendar year and therefore it's accounted for? Or are we saying if we maintain our current vacancy rates and we don't fill these, do you understand? Does this capture if we hire everyone we say we're supposed to hire next year? Or is it with the current vacancy rates we have today?
Yes, so this assumes a 5% vacancy rate.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Because, I mean, we added that plug a few years back, and
Yes.
I believe it was 5%. We assumed that 5% of the staff would not be filled. So that plug is still in there. Because I know
Yes.
that there was some talk about taking it out, but I was pretty adamant that we kept it
There's
in.
two departments that I did not, was city clerk and library, because library's at full FTEs, but those are the two only departments that didn't include a 5% vacancy rate, but every other department included a 5%. Current vacancy, I believe I provided the council a supplemental regards to vacancies. We're currently hovering around 13%. So, okay, and then the second line item, benefits. Benefits are just medical and pension, going up 2.5%.
So just real quick on the
Yes.
benefits then, because the CTA,
CEA?
CEA,
Yes,
their benefits have not been adjusted.
no.
So if we did sign a deal with the CEA, and because we're streamlining all benefits, that will go up as well.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And M&O is going up 7.3%. Some contributing factor, of course, is just regular contractually obligated items going up, utilities going up. Operating supplies, you'll see later in the department's request for increasing their budget. That's just going up due to inflation and costs rising. Then there's also included in the M&O are certain new asks that we'll cover during the department budgets that you'll see. That's contributing to the 7.3. So overall, our operating expenditures going up 7.1% next year. As I mentioned earlier, the transfers out of $15.2 million. I want to highlight to the council what these four items are, what's contributing to that $15.2 million budget for transfers out. There's the POB payment of $9.5 million that we make annually. This also includes the staff's recommended CIP budget for next year, $5.2 million. Also for $300,000 for solid waste fund. This is a subsidy that the city provides residents for solid waste pickup. And then lastly, senior housing fund of $200,000. This was a new decision or recommendation that was asked last year to include annually into the budget of $200,000 transfer to the senior housing fund. So that's included in this total $15.2 million transfers out from the general fund. The next 3 slides, I do want to spend a little bit of time, being that when I did a dry run through with the executive team, there was quite a bit of questions, and I wanted to help council kind of understand what's going on with our FTEs. So if we go down to the bottom right corner, for next year, we're decreasing our FTE by 43.6 FTEs. So let me try to explain and give you some context behind what this 43.6 is. So this year in our adopted budget, we had 418.07 FTEs approved by council. Next year, we're decreasing that to 374.4 positions. Now, FTE, as I mentioned, it's 2 factors. One is the full-time. A full-time body is 1.0 FTE, but a part-time, the way we calculate part-time is actually hours, not actual head count or bodies that we're actually hiring. And it seems like from my research and my conversation with my department, it looks like this year when the budget was being prepared for just a simple oversight from staff that the Rec and Park Library, if you go right to the top, that decrease of 46.6, at the time when the budget was being adopted, it seems like there was slight miscommunication on, they used headcount instead of a true FTE calculation. So that's why we saw that big increase in this year's budget. But of course, we're correcting that. And so we're reflecting the true increase or true FTE for next year. And that's 101.74. And then the various other departments has increases, but some of this I will cover for the council regards to what the true FTE or new positions are. And some of these are kind of cleanup, and I'll provide that detail as we go through these slides.
So Paul, just to clarify, you're saying that in line 1, our adopted personnel for 23-24 was just an overstatement, a miscalculation, and that's why there was such a delta between those 2 years?
Yes. I believe that it really was because of line 1 in Rec and Park Library, when they kind of drafted their number together, probably some miscommunication in regards to, they used a head count instead of an FTE calculation. The way I calculate is, let's say 500 hours for a lifeguard, you divide that by 2,080 hours in a year, you get like 0.24 FTE. But that's how it should have been calculated. But then we actually calculated per probably a position or a body, and that's why that number was high. Obviously, we don't spend it. It comes right back to the general fund reserve. So there was no budgetary impact, but it was definitely an FTE miscalculation. And one thing I've implemented moving forward with the departments and the department heads was, after we draft the FTEs and the positions, we sent it back to the department heads to review and of course sign off. And I think that was maybe a missing piece last year, and that should have been caught during the process. So hopefully, can't guarantee there won't be any errors, but my job is to build credibility and make numbers correct. And so I've implemented that so that the department heads could review, sign off, and then come back to me so that we can put it together into the budget, so we won't have an error like that moving forward. Just to kind of drill a little bit deeper into these FTEs, because I know this is important to the council. I broke this up into 2 categories, as I mentioned. There's the full-time headcount, and then the part-time, and how the part-time is calculated. On the full-time, it's simple. One body is 1.0 FTE, but on the part-time side, as I mentioned, it's hourly rate, hours worked for next year. So for next year, our FTE on the full-time side is going up by 4.0. And in the last slide on FTE, we'll kind of break out what that 4.0 is. But then on the part-time side, as I mentioned, that's that big decrease to correct the budget to reflect the true FTEs going into next year. So this third slide on FTE is really what breaks down those numbers even further. So in regards to full-time, as I mentioned, we're going up by 4.0 FTEs next year. And there's some council-approved positions. The top 2 positions were the aquatics manager and the environmental programs manager. These positions were approved by council after the budget was adopted. And that was not, of course, updated or included into the budget. So we are including that into our budget. The next two items are actually cleanup items. So my conversations with Public Works and Police for the senior civil engineer and police officer position, these should have been included in the budget, but for some reason it was dropped off and not included in this current adopted budget. So I am cleaning this up and adding it back into the budget. The PSO position, or the public safety officer position, this is actually a true add of FTE, a new position that we are asking the council to approve. But the department is actually deleting a police assistant position to add that PSO position. So net-wise, it's just a 4.0 increase in full-time. On the part-time side, as I mentioned, it's just the hours, and we're reflecting the true hours of what part-time hours will be required for next year. And the only couple items I wanted to highlight down here is the Public Safety Officer 2. They are deleting this part-time position, being that they're requesting for a full-time PSO. Also, the Personnel Officer part-time, this was another item that needed to be cleaned up, meaning it was dropped and not included in this year's budget, but should have been, so I'm adding that back in there. And then the Licensed Permit Specialist is truly a new position that the fire department is requesting. This is cost recovery, which I'll go into more detail later, but this is a new ask from the department. And then deleting an administrative intern position in fire. And lastly, the community development, there was a code compliance officer of a part-timer that unfortunately was not included in this year's budget that we are cleaning up and adding to next year's budget. And I'll also, during the department budgets, you will see the actual budgetary impacts to what those are. Okay. All right. Staying on the big picture, reserves-wise, our reserves will remain healthy going into next year. Our general fund reserve will remain at 25%. That's $23.4 million. Even with the funding of the plunge, we were able to maintain that 25% reserve policy, which of course keeps our AAA rating going into next year. Our economic uncertainty reserve is at $2 million. Our OPEB reserve is 33.4 million. Pension trust reserve is at 5.8 million. And lastly, the general fund CIP reserve. This was a new policy, reserve policy that council approved last year to put aside 5% of the expenditures. So we did put aside last year $400,000 into this CIP reserve. So that is our overall reserves. Going into, I call these next two slides, what do we have at the end of the year? And what does council have that they can spend discretionary funds on, potentially labor negotiations and funding our CIPs? And so the unassigned fund balance, these are any balances or in a way savings account that we don't have any dedicated budget tied to. So basically at the end of the year, starting July 1st of the fiscal year, I anticipate our unassigned fund balance to be at $31.1 million. So then we add the revenues that we're expected to collect next year of $96.7 million. We deduct the expenditures of 93.5, which excludes the CIP that's proposed for next year. We're anticipating our ending fund balance to end the year at $34.2 million. And with the 25% reserve requirement of $23.4 million, we should have approximately $7.7 million at the end of the year next year. And with that said, staff is recommending with the unassigned fund balance at $7.7 million, we are proposing for the council to put aside $5.2 million for the proposed general fund CIP projects for next year. And then the remaining funds of $2.4 million to put aside for reserves for some of the upcoming labor negotiations, such as the CEA and FFA and any other negotiations that will occur next year. Okay. All right. This slide here is a slide that's very typical to most agencies use. Just due to time, I wasn't able to incorporate the long-range forecast, But I do, in the future, want to incorporate that. But the numbers from the long-range forecast, we did embed that in here. This is just really a 10-year lookout. As you can see, if you go to the left column of 24, you see the blue line is our revenues. Our expenditures are the orange line. It's higher than our revenue. So basically, we're dipping into our reserves, and most of that is driven, of course, because of our CIP. And so as you can see in subsequent years, the expenditures are going to be higher than our revenues that are going to come in, meaning we're going to be dipping into our reserves. And eventually, in the next 6-7 years, we're hoping that if everything stays equal without any new measures of tax measures, we hopefully can bring up our reserves back up. But that's, of course, as I mentioned, if everything stays as what's currently proposed without any new measures, with the growth, expenditure growth of 3.5%. The last few slides I have for you, regards to, these are for anything that's non-general fund. So Cultural Development Fund is their budget. They're actually coming tomorrow night to propose their budget. So any budgetary items that the council approves tomorrow night, I will incorporate that into our budget that I'll bring back to council on June 4th.
So let me ask, when do we talk about the staffing of that cultural fund, right? I mean, tomorrow night, we're gonna have a presentation where they've got 400 and some change, $400,000. They're proposing $300,000 in expenses. 100 grand of that is staff compensation. If we don't talk about that at this budget thing, are we gonna talk about that tomorrow night? And when do we ask the question, if we have a depleting amount of cultural funds, why are we dedicating a third of it to staff as opposed to trying to allocate those to putting on actual funds or doing art or whatever it is? So if now's not the time to crack that egg open, let me know when. I'm happy to have that conversation. I don't know if it's a budget question, if it's a staffing question, if it's something the cultural advisory, they're not going to have the ability to say whether or not they should have a full-time staff member for that. That's going to come from the dais. So if we're talking about the cultural budget, and this is the only slide we have, so is now the time to have that conversation? I'm happy to have it.
Well, and I also believe we kind of did have that conversation, and we were hesitant on rehiring that position, but there was a challenge about the, it being a union membership at that time. So we really should have that conversation, because I know we did have this conversation, and we said put a pause on that because we anticipated that those funds would be depleted, but then I heard that position was filled. So maybe now is a good time to have the conversation.
That is my recollection.
I agree, because actually the ACC is my committee, and I was there and making this big speech as to how they were gonna have to run things themselves, and then I was quickly told about 5 minutes after, actually 30 seconds after I stopped saying that we had already hired someone. So I was under the assumption that after the last Cultural Development Arts Coordinator had left, that we were not going to fill that position precisely for the reasons that are being brought up right now. So now, the biggest problem we have with this fund is it is draining out. And there's going to be no need for an ACC committee pretty soon because we don't have any money.
Okay, so I'll just jump in and make a few comments. We did have some discussion earlier on this year when the Cultural Arts Coordinator left about potentially reworking that position or maybe bringing some changes so that it would include responsibility over some other areas. But there were some challenges as far as working with the labor unions on that and making those changes. And so at the time, there was nobody in the position. I was doing it myself or trying to. And the arts components, the programs and all that, that's not as much of an immediate need, but the dealing with the developers that are coming in and need to move through that process, we really need staff. Whether or not we need a full-time person moving forward, I think that will be something that we determine. Tomorrow night, the Cultural Arts Coordinator is going to come and present a full plan for the year, which includes money for a master plan for cultural arts. And in that master plan, we'll look at the scope of what we really want to do with this program and what that staffing level looks like. So I would recommend that we continue with the position at least for a year. He's going to really dive in and look at all of the details and what the council really wants to do, and then determine what staffing levels we want moving ahead. We also do anticipate some development in the next year or so. I just talked with Michael Allen about it last week, so we are going to be getting a significant contribution to the fund, so I think we will be able to staff at least for a few more years. But of course, we'll bring that detail as we get it. So you will get more information about what we're planning to do next year and how we're going to kind of look at the staffing levels.
So basically tomorrow night, there'll be a strategic plan for how this fund or this committee is going to run.
Tomorrow night, we're going to ask,
And
we're going
generate.
to, right, tomorrow night, we're going to make a proposal for all the different programs, but one of those components is the council approving us to do a master plan for cultural arts. That would, and it's going to be done by staff, we're not going to go outside for that, but it would be to create, you know, really the vision for moving forward as far as how do we want the staffing to look, how much do we want to do internally versus, we've talked about granting things out at different times or providing more grants to local agencies. So Randy really wants to kind of put together a plan for the council to consider.
So tomorrow night, then, can you make sure that they present how much money how long
Yes.
it's been in place, how much money we've collected, how much we spent, and what art installations we put out? I know we've done a lot of events, but I haven't seen any arts installations, and that was kind of the core thing, was about long-term art installations, and in my recollection, there has been none. So I just want to make sure we're not just planning parties, and that this is, you know, the whole concept was to bring art into our town for a long-term, for the essence of the community for a long time. And I have a feeling sometimes it's easier just to plan a party, and I'm, you know, my feelings on just planning parties. I think nonprofits should be running them. And but if we could see that, I want to make sure we clearly understand where we spent the money. What have we spent the money on?
Right, and I think you'll get a better idea of that tomorrow. Why the conversation is separate from the budget discussion, I'm not sure why it's separated out into two different evenings. It's been that way since I've been here, but I sort of have the same line of thinking. But we will provide a much more comprehensive look tomorrow night, and I think you'll be able to get into a more detailed discussion about what we want to do moving ahead.
And then in that, because obviously the things we've talked about is putting art in the parks and art
Right.
in the plunge, and those line items should be identified, and that money, so that budget, if it's $400,000, what percentage of that is for the plunge and for the art, for the park? Because we want art installations in both those two locations.
Right, correct, and we've been discussing those.
So we need to change the process then. We can't hire someone and then present a budget which recommends maintaining that person's salary out of a diminishing fund of capital. Like, I don't need a study or report to tell me that this is not going to be sustainable, right? We are robbing our community of artwork and other things that we want to bring to the community because of the cost of just processing the system. So I understand that, you know, now we're going to take a look at it. This program's been running for a year. I've always questioned why we're pulling out a salary on this funding. And I don't want to beat the horse anymore. We'll talk about it tomorrow, but I think in the future, when we're talking about hiring someone and using these types of funds, we should have express consent from City Council about the legitimacy and the effectiveness of doing that, because now we're kind of just, I don't know, we're dealing with it after the fact, that's all. And by all means, it's a great commission, they do important work. I am just worried that the way we are administering it is being counterproductive of the goal of the entire program. So I'll leave it at that.
Along those lines, and we're going to get there when it gets to your department, but you know, the aquatics manager thing that I thought we were putting a pause on, I still see it's in there. We do not have a business strategy yet for aquatics. We don't even know what the plan is yet, and we're about ready to hire someone to come in for no plan.
Well, we're hoping that person will create a plan, a business plan. The council did approve the position. Both of these positions were in the budget, so maybe, you know, there's differences of opinions, but as far as what's been decided at the dais, they were both budgeted positions. If we need to make changes, we'll have to figure out how to do that. Okay.
I was just informed too that the position is actually 25% funded through the general fund, 75% out of the cultural fund. And I think potentially next year's budget study session will incorporate the ACC meeting conversation during the budget study session, and not just as another item on a different night. We'll make sure we do that. Continuing on, just non-general fund funds. Our debt service fund, we have two debt services, as you are aware. We have the Douglas Street gap closure that's maturing in 2035, so that'll be from 10 years from now. And we have that pension obligation bond that will mature in 2040. Our special revenue funds, these are our restricted funds that majority of these funds are used for road overlay street projects. But then they also includes the senior housing fund as well of $1 million. So overall, our special revenue funds are $6.9 million for next year. Both of our enterprise funds are water and wastewater funds. Their fund balance remains robust. The water fund is $57.1 million. And next year, we will be conducting a Prop 218 rate study in anticipation of the new rates kicking in 2026. The wastewater fund also, the fund balance remains strong at $13.2 million for next year.
Hey, Paul, in your
Yes.
note, you say, let council know the West Basin is expecting a 10 to 15% hike in potable water.
Yes.
And it says we're
almost forgot
gonna,
about that.
currently not budgeted, would need to come back during mid-year.
Yes. So I did leave an asterisk, and thank you for reminding me. The Public Works Director had mentioned that West Basin Municipal Water is coming July for their new rates that will take effect. That's they're estimating 10 to 15% increase. I did not include that number into the budget. So if that does take effect, I would probably have to come back during mid-year next year to make that adjustment to the budget next year.
Okay, and this is a pass-through to our residents, right? So
Yes,
if
it
they
is.
raise the rates, we are gonna be forced to raise our rates to our residents.
Would want to revert to Public Works Director.
Yes, we will be able to when we do the new rate study. And that's about a year from now.
Is that being
Year-end.
driven by Metropolitan Water? Because Metropolitan Water talked about a massive increase last year and then backed off of that. Is this West Basin raising rates,
This
or
is
is it
West
West Basin
Basin.
raising because Metropolitan's raising?
That, and because they also have issues with additional cost regarding what they do, regarding chemicals, regarding the upgrade of their facilities. They're trying to keep the proposed improvements as part of their CIP program to have the least increase in rate. That's why they give us kind of 10 to 15%. So it's a combination of a lot of things.
And also, Elias, wasn't some of that as a result of the increase that they have in chemicals and whatever is because of the dirty water coming from Hyperion?
Yes,
So could we not go after the LA City to help fund that if they're having to accommodate Hyperion sending in bad water? Doesn't that break their contract with? 'Cause
Yes,
I know
ma'am.
that downstream effect, Chevron's also complaining that the
Yes,
water
ma'am.
that they're getting is also dirty water.
Yes, ma'am.
So I feel like, once again, Hyperion is at the root of everything, and now our ratepayers are gonna have to pay the price for the Hyperion. So I'm not really happy about that, so if we can go after LA City to help cover some of that cost, I think that would be advisable.
Yes, ma'am. And we have all the intentions to cooperate with West Basin to that end. But that's, my understanding is what you said is exactly correct.
I mean, it's very frustrating because, you know, they made the mistake, they weren't on top of things, and now, once again, not only do we have to deal with the smell and the odor, we have to pay the cost.
Yes.
So I just think that we should, if there's some way we can work with the LA City to help cover those costs for waste business, so we don't have to rate our hikes.
That's
Raise
the
our-
plan. That's the plan. Yes, ma'am.
I agree with everything you're saying about Hyperion. I just can't think of how it is Los Angeles County is going to pay our water rates. I think this is, you know, if they raise the rates, the city will pay more. We're going to have to ask our residents to pay more. And outside of asking LA, can you please pay our water rates, which they will say no, we really have no recourse. I mean, it's,
Remember, we do, because unlike the sanitation fees for wastewater, West Basin, those are elected officials. So mobilize residents and say, hey, here's the projected issue. You know, we have a representative on there. Those are, I mean, people have a voice in their rates. I mean, show up at the meeting, you know, public comment. I mean, it's not, we're over the barrel on sanitation. They do whatever they want. They set the costs at LA City and we just have to pay it. But on West Basin, those are elected officials. I mean, you know.
well, let's be proactive and let's put on our website that this may be coming because it's going to hit a lot of seniors pretty hard. Thank you, Les.
Thank you.
Thank you, Les. Our internal service funds, we have three funds here. The equipment replacement fund, the estimated fund balance would be $1 million. A month ago, I came to council regards to a funding swap from our Prop A local return funds with the City of Commerce for a little over $500,000. We actually received that check last week from City of Commerce, so we will be expecting to add that to this balance, so it should be increasing by $500,000 into next year as well. That's not included in this $1 million. The general liability, I do want to highlight these two funds here, general liability and workers' comp fund. They're both in the deficit, and they've been in the deficit, at least from what I was told, for the past 10 years, except for 1 year in fiscal year 15-16, when the general liability was a positive, but other than that, those past 10 years, both have been in the negative. And this is one of those areas where, moving forward, I would have to come up with a plan and come to council and see what we can do to patch up this, these two funds being negative. So this would be one of these tasks that I would have to work on and have a plan to see how we can patch up these two negative funds. With that said,
That's a good segue.
yes.
Before we jump into headcount and department budgets, I would
Yes.
really implore my colleagues to take a look critically at the revenue that we're anticipating, because I've got some notes here. Given a few things. One, there's no question we are in uncertain times when it comes to big drivers of our revenue base, office vacancy being one of them. We also know, colleagues pointed out, the MOU increases are not in here. We also were told that over the next 10 years, we will be dipping into reserves, which is not really the intent of the reserves, at least the way in which we've discussed it up here on the dais. We also know that we are already $10 million deficient in general liability and workers' comp, which are operating expenses, recurring operating expenses every single year. So we're already digging ourselves out of a hole. I think we need to take a really hard look at what we're expecting in revenue. I would rather us, from a process standpoint, reduce what we expect in revenue by $8 million, and instead assume that what we're currently doing as a run rate is where we're gonna end up. That's a conservative budget. It's not, a conservative budget is not expecting growth, particularly in an uncertain time. And then we know we've got a mid-year coming up. Why not look at any excesses? If we're above target, let's look mid-year, but let's not assume almost 10% growth in top-line revenue. That is not consistent with the last 8-9 years on council. It has been to be very, and this is nothing on you, Mr. Chung, I'm hopefully not directing this towards you, it's just more of a, it's, the vacancy aside, I know that's like a game we play. I don't know that that's the most astute budgeting methodology to assume vacancies in a budget anyway, but we're expecting a 10% growth in revenue. I don't think that's conservative. I would suggest we go backwards in our assumptions on revenue, revisit mid-year, and then if we have excess funds, so be it. But we don't even have the money we have $400,000 we're setting aside, is that the number I saw? For capital improvements?
Oh, no, that was from last year.
Okay, but what are we
We're not-
setting, we have 7 million, we think, that's assuming that we grow $8 million more.
Uh,
So we're saying basically, if we are, the way I read this budget, if we hit the 96 million in general fund, we'll have 8.4 million in excess, of which most of that will be allocated to the CIP.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, that whole picture of that 8.5% increase or $8.4 million is not the true increase.
I know, but you said it was like 5%
Because
roughly.
Yeah, because we're
Yes.
missing a column, right? We're missing
Yes.
the
Yeah, but
actual.
Year-end-
Still,
year-end
we're-
estimate.
regardless.
Yes.
My point is the same, which is, why not use what we're currently doing as a runway, given where we are in this economy right now with elections and everything else coming up too? Why not bank on that when we start allocating department budgets, as opposed to banking on a 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever you want to call it, percent growth, and then maybe missing our target? So if we exceed our target in revenue, great, then we've got money mid-year to say, let's allocate this. But I would hope that we would be a little bit more of fiduciary in terms of how we're allocating, what we're expecting in terms of revenue, and then what we base our expenses on. That would be my concern.
And I also wanted to preface that and add that I was informed that the CEA's budget, we did assume a 5% increase. Yeah, Vicky let me know that we
So
did.
fire's not in there though, right?
Fire is not in there.
Were the benefits of the
Well,
CEA?
Fire
or
was
just
already
the
passed
pay?
at 1.5%, so we already included that. in
Okay,
there,
what
yeah.
about the benefits of CEA, to Councilmember Perstuck's point earlier?
Do you know if the
Yeah, we put 5% increase for the salary, and the benefit, it will be adjusted according to the salaries, all formula.
So the benefits will come later, but it's not in there yet,
Yes.
right? Okay.
It's reflected based on salary. We have 5% for salary increase. Of course, benefit will be increased too, according to the system.
But that budgetary, the assumption on benefits here, that does, I think she's saying that I think they might be in there.
Benefit is for.
You're saying it's all total?
The salary.
So yes, the salaries and benefits, it was 5%. We included a 5%. Yes. 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 For CEA, any CEA staff, we assumed a 5% salary increase, but also a benefit increase as well. We just put a plug there just to have it as a budget so that we don't have to come back and increase the budget even more next year.
The thing that really hits home for me is the fact that when I look, and it was your statement, Paul, earlier about how we're going to be dipping into reserves for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And that's assuming, I think you said 3.5% year-over-year growth.
Yes.
That means we have no money for CIP. We have no money for CIP, so are we going to sit here and say we're going to grow the size of our government? I fundamentally struggle with this right here. I just think that we need to be more cautious, more conservative in terms of what we're assuming. And then if we have funds mid-year, let's use those funds towards new positions, CIP. But this picture does not look very rosy to me. I mean, tell me, is someone seeing something different than me? We look
Well,
at a 10-year horizon?
Historically, we've never run at 20. I mean, the 25% reserve is a new innovation. I mean, bully for us for it, but for years we ran it at 15% with the idea that philosophically the council had that we were hoarding people's money rather than spending it on things they want. So I mean, I think that's a bit of a philosophical debate about the propriety of dipping into or adjusting the reserve rate. But some of these CIP items are budgeted in here. They're reflected in this
No.
budget. They're not.
No.
And also say that when we picked that 25% number based on your predecessor CFO, that was the number we wanted to hit per industry standards.
For the 25% reserve,
Yes.
when it comes to reserves, there is no gold standard. It typically is 3 months' worth of operating expenditures you want to put aside. That's kind of the gold standard.
That's 20, 25, that's 25%. So, and also I think the money that, I hear what you're saying about the reserves, however, if you look at what the Treasury Department's been able to do with the funds that we do have sitting there, that's been beneficial.
And I have a question. So I'm just confused, because when I asked earlier, you said that the FTEs that we don't have MEUs was not reflected in the number, but then you just said they were for benefits and salaries. So that's a change. But then on this recommendation page, where you're saying put, of the $7.6 million, put $2.4 million reserves into labor negotiations. But if you've already put a 5% plug in there for the people that we don't have a contract for, why would we add another 2.6?
So when I say
2.4.
reserve, basically, I'm not saying let's put aside an actual reserve. I'm just saying that that's amount left over that you can have aside.
But why
so
would we
that-
do that if we are in negotiations with everybody and we already put a 5% plug?
It's just my recommendation that we just have that there. The council has a discretion to
I just trying to
allocate that
understand
however.
why, like, what am I not seeing? Like,
I
what's-
just took simple math, meaning I
Okay.
took the here, let me get to that actual slide so that I'm not.
It's slide number
misspeaking.
17.
Yes, go to the 17 slide, there it is. Yes,
So you're
so,
just-
because my estimate is that we're gonna end the year at $7.7 million in the
Yes.
surplus net income. So we're setting aside $5.2 million for general fund projects, CIP projects. And then what's remaining, I'm just saying that we should set that aside for potential labor negotiations, but that could have been just, we have $2.4 million left over that the council has discretion to utilize to your discretion.
I would ask my colleagues this, if we asked the constituents what would they prefer over the next 10 years, we go out to borrow, potentially on property tax bond, to get the CIP programs done, because there's no way forward, given what I'm seeing. We'd have to borrow the money, or we take a hard look at how we're running the government and reduce expenses. What would our constituents say? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, they certainly supported a school bond, but we know we have $60 to $80 million roughly out there in unfunded capital improvement projects, and I'm looking out to 2032, and there's no way to get there. So we're gonna say that basically 2 full councils from now, they're still gonna have the same issue that we have?
Well, I think we've talked about other potential new sources of revenue that could support the CIP budgets. I mean, I'm just throwing this out as a discussion that we had about potentially looking at a sales tax measure, which I know working with the attorney's office right now may be triggered. That item can generate anywhere from $8 to $9 million a year. That's a revenue stream that could be bonded against. It's just another option that we would bring to you down the road should the council want to take a hard look at how we fund that $60 to $80 million CIP budget.
Yeah, I just fundamentally have a problem with, we're never going backwards. We keep increasing our size, and we keep increasing taxes, not just at the city level, but at the state level, to the detriment of people living here. Or people are paying 50% of their income in taxes in the state. That's before sales tax. So where does it end? And this isn't me on the soapbox. I'm really trying to ask about what are we gonna do here when we assume what the revenue is? Do we wanna just assume we're gonna be up 5 to 7%? Or do we wait until mid-year and see how we're doing and budget what we are doing currently as a run rate? That's the question.
So I'll go ahead and say I'm not in favor of the city having any taxes or bonds for our capital improvements. I think we can find a way to budget smartly, prudently, and get these projects done over time. If your concern is the projected revenues is 10% too generous in the outlook, doesn't that kind of line up with what Paul is saying, this 7.6 million in funds we have kind of, even if we adopt this proposed budget on slide 17, he's saying we're still going to have $7 million. Am I reading that wrong?
He's saying if we grow 9.5%, which is about 5-6% over our current run rate, then we're going to have the almost $8 million.
Yes.
If we do not grow, we will not have that money. That's my concern, is that we're appropriating everything expecting best-case scenario, why not assume worst-case scenario, mid-year, look at the numbers and say, we did what we thought we were gonna do, awesome, now let's allocate the funds. I don't know why we're in a hurry to do it now. We know for a fact from landowners in town that leases are being renegotiated down, people are leaving leases, people are leaving the state. This is not rhetoric, this is actually happening. So I would hate to assume that things are gonna be constant, is my concern.
So if we cut that 9% to 4.5% growth, right? Then we can basically make some projections on half of the expected growth. Are you saying you want a flat, whatever we did last year, we're doing next year?
Yeah, my concern, just, any year I've approached budgeting, I look at what are we currently doing as a run rate. Unless I think things are gonna fundamentally change, I use the run rate to project where I'm gonna be as a budget to spend the money. But we're expecting things to get better. We're expecting more TOT, we're expecting more stays at a higher average daily rate. We're expecting more headcount in office, the two biggest drivers with sales tax. We're expecting people to spend more money that's gonna benefit us. So we're expecting everything to be what would be consistent with a good economy. But we don't know that that's the case right now. And we also know that our office market is hurting. I mean, we have 3 towers on PCH that are practically in receivership. That's a big part of our office base right there. So I'm not trying to be dire, I'm just trying to say, like, why would we assume anything what is current, the constant right now, the run rate? Why would we assume different, I guess, from a budgeting standpoint? That's what I'm struggling with.
No, but even if we adopt your perspective, how does that change what we have to do here today? I'm saying we are just saying, look, instead of projecting 9%, keep it flat for our future growth, and let's look at those numbers, allocate with that
The
money.
difference, Ryan, would just be, we wouldn't have the 2.4 million reserved for the new labor agreements, and we wouldn't have the $5 million of CIP.
Right.
If we
everything's
stay
flat.
constant, yes.
If, with my assumptions, I am conservative in my assumptions. Of course, this is my first year here. I don't shoot for this, stars hoping to hit the moon. I did look into these revenues really tightly with Dino, regards to how have we collected how are we doing year to date? And that's the foundation, not really what the adopted budget was. It was really based upon what we've collected, what are the local economic factors, talking to some of our consultants that they're pretty good at projecting out sales tax, property tax. We use those assumptions and propose the revenues. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball. Nobody does. And we don't know how the economy is going to look like a year from now. If the decisions are based upon kind of at the end of the year, are we going to have $7.7 million? The CIP decisions that the council makes, of course, is going to fluctuate depending upon what that amount is. If it's mid-year, then some of these projects won't be able to move forward until mid-year. So what I did was I did my best kind of estimate on revenues to be conservative, not overly inflating a rosy picture either. I wanted to make sure I paint a actual picture that I believe we can hit, and that's what I wanted to propose to the council. It wasn't really just a, let's just inflate the revenue so that we can afford.
I just think it's a difference of opinions. I'm saying conservative in my mind is what are we currently doing? Conservative in your mind is 5% growth over what we're currently doing. It's just a difference of opinion. That's all. But I mean, we have some CIP projects right now. We think the pool's going to be, that gap will be bridged by fundraising, right?
Fundraising, yes.
But we have other CIP projects that we want to do, and what we're saying here is, if all goes well at the end of the year, and the labor agreements come in at that 2.4 million that we're setting aside for it incrementally, then we'll have $5 million for capital improvement projects.
Yes.
Right.
We know we want to do capital improvement projects regardless, though. So wouldn't it be better to say, hey, let's scale back what we expect we're going to do in revenue. Let's make the necessary adjustments to our operating expenses so that we know we have CIP money, and let's get going on those projects now. We have been, we just got some CIP projects done. That was the first time in eight years we've been sitting up here, since 2016, and we finally got the restrooms at Rec Park done.
Yeah.
8 years. So when I look at this again, it's like we're another 10 years out before we're gonna fundamentally get any CIPs done without borrowing money. Or raising taxes, basically.
I think it comes down to a fundamental issue of, you have to look at things with guardrails from a forecasting model over a 12-month period of time.
Yes.
Right? And we're looking at it a lot further out, right? So what you look at, what might be a good situation in the next 12 months, we already kind of see becoming a problem 3 years, 4 years down the road. I think that's kind of the fundamental problem we have here. Because, for example, every time we do a CIP, every time we get it done, one of the things we're going to talk about here is that, okay, we just built a $15 million pool, and as we talked about, now that's going to create its own new huge bucket of expenses, right? So then how are we going to be able to accommodate that? So a lot of the things I think we're trying to get to here is, and that's why I'm not sure, it's like 3 different discussions, you know, as we go forward. Right now, I know we're trying to get to what we can forecast for the next year, but I do agree to go off the run rate. I mean, in any business, I mean, we're all dealing with business right now, all of us. There is maybe a 2%, you know, looked at positively potential increase in revenues for companies right now. Nobody's going that high, especially the city government. So I do agree that I think we need to be a little bit more conservative, knowing that, of course, at mid-year, we can adjust all those things and move on. But I think to start with a little bit more of a basis in reality might kind of help out the process going forward. And I'm not saying that what you're saying is unrealistic. You're looking at your models, you're looking at what you have, and you're saying, look, over the next 12 months, I feel real good about this. But we're looking probably over the next, 36 months, 48 months, saying, we're going to run into some problems, and we want to try to plan for it now. I think that's kind of where we're at here.
And that's helpful direction, because obviously, following up on your point, we as staff went back and identified those capital projects that we have been working on, the council's directed us to work on, whether it was the plunge or rec park or anything else. And I think, as Paul shared, we budgeted, what, 24 million last year, which is, we've carried that over. So the 18 million, I think, that we're projecting this year is to keep those projects on the radar so that that we'll know that you want us to spend time on pursuing those projects. But if you want us to pull back on that CIP, we certainly will, and wait till mid-year.
No, we're not. No one wants to pull back on CIP. We want to make sure that we're not spending all the money, right?
Okay.
On projections that we think are a little rosy, even though
Okay.
they may not be, Paul.
Right.
So that we have the money to actually do the CIP. It's one of our strategic goals that got moved up to the top of the
Right.
list, and there's certainly a frustration here on the dais of what is it we have to do to get these things done quicker
Right.
and more efficiently. So it's not about putting that on the back burner.
Okay.
It's about making that a focus and knowing that we are doing things proactively to save and plan and prepare
Right.
for getting those projects
Okay.
done.
Well, and I think too, when Drew and I first came on the dais, one of the things we remember is the debacle after 2008, where the city had done a lot of stuff that they didn't anticipate the recession. So there was a lot of having to pull back in 2009, 2010. We don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that we're smooth sailing
Okay.
if there is a recession, or we're already in a recession. But I just think, we still have scars from that time, and I just want to make sure that we're looking at this with not rose-colored glasses.
Okay.
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 2:30, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Back at it. Mr. Chung, please.
All right. So we'll move on to the department budgets, the individual department budgets that's proposed for next year. For part of the agenda.
Excuse me,
Oh,
Paul, just
yes.
real quick, Mayor and Council, we obviously deliberated during our break, and I think what'll be helpful, and we would like to go through the rest of the budget. We've got each department's budget. But I'd like to look at this, I know the 7.6 million reserve, or the, what is it, what did you call it,
Unassigned.
the
fund balance.
unassigned, that number, what I'm hearing is let's not assume that that's a real number. I know there's a difference of, 5% growth versus no growth. So we could go back, let us go back with that number, assume that that number is not gonna happen, and we'll come back at mid-year, if you will. But I'd also like to come back with some recommendations on how we deal with that if that goes away, if, we bring you a budget on June 4th without that number, what that looks like, and maybe we can do a short additional study session between now and the 4th, just to be all on the same page with that.
Okay, with that, thank you. With that in mind, then, when we look at the department budget, some of these might change.
Yeah,
So we
sure.
probably shouldn't dig, as council, probably shouldn't dig that much into it yet, right?
Yeah.
Just, okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
All right, thank you, City Manager. Part of the agenda included an Exhibit F for the personnel summary, also Exhibit G for area of focus. It really just kind of gave the department 4 to maybe 6 bullets of what they're focusing on next year. So that's part of the staff agenda as well. So let me jump into the individual department budgets. This is a little different than what was presented in the past, but I wanted to show the council what the budget looks like for each of the departments. We'll start with City Council as just an example of, but because most of the departments will have this similar structure. So on the right top is the table regards to their the total expenditure for the budget for the department. And then the second line below is the current adopted budget. And then the third line is the changes, the dollar change and the percentage change for next year. And what I did was I kind of highlighted certain items, the big ticket items that council would consider, that departments are asking above and beyond their kind of regular budgetary needs for their operations next year. So on the city council side, the budget is $229,000. Personnel is going up 7%, and the M&O dropping by 35%. The personnel side, the increase is really the medical benefits. That's going up. On the M&O side, there's a decrease of dues and subscriptions by $20,000. And that's really actually just moving a budget for the SBC COG annual membership from council to the city manager's budget. And you'll see an increase on the city manager's budget of $20,000 for that. And then $6,000 computer supply, this was a budget that was never set, so we're just setting that budget for next year. And then no positional change. And this structure will be similar for most, if not all, the departments. City attorney's budget for next year is $935,000. The increase is $100,000 from the current budget, about an 11% increase.
Paul, real quick. In our packet, we had like Exhibit A and all that stuff. Is that all kind of, are you just kind of summarizing it right there?
Yes.
All right, I'm just saying, in the city council one, there was the last line item, 6403, Sister City. I think we talked about doing something with that last year. It was like $5,000. I'm assuming we didn't spend it, and it's just carrying forward. Is this really something that we are going to address in the next 12 months? Does it need to be in there? I personally do not think so. So, congratulations, you just found another $5,000.
Yeah, I think that in theory, that was
My
to
work is
host
done
those trips down there, and in lieu of some of the violence around it, we haven't taken it. I think rather than totally wipe it out, do we want to put a placeholder in there of $100 or
Just thinking we can
something?
always add it in down the road if it becomes more of a priority, but I think we have bigger fish to fry right now, that's all.
Is that more of a chamber event, or is that city-driven?
It was historically Rotary and Kiwanis.
Okay.
City would get involved, club-driven, city would get involved, like the fire department gave them some surplus equipment
Yeah,
back in
truck
the day.
and all
And Little League was involved. A lot of legacy with Wymus, with some, like the Estrada family in town came here because of that relationship. I remember before, I mean, one of the presidents was killed, wasn't she, Chris? It was something tragic.
They attacked, the bodyguard was killed.
They call it like president, but Mary, yeah. Oh, Bonnie, okay, I know there was some, it was bad. That was a couple years after they came up here. So we did host them to dinner at Chef Hana's. Barbara, you were there for that. That was nice. I don't know, Lance, maybe they come up here, but yeah, it's tough right now. I don't know that any of the service clubs, I did try to revive it a couple years ago, and some of the people that were involved, like Dr. Bill Watkins and others, just didn't really have the appetite, I don't think, for going down there. So I'm not sure, but.
So just leave it as a placeholder, and if a club-driven organization wants to do something, we can listen, but I don't think the council is gonna take any proactive steps, to Lance's point, right?
You know, we have had, like, I've met just last week with some people from Japan. We have a friend of mine has a Japanese incubator here in town, and they've been touring Torrance and Chinese companies as well. I think maybe have something in there, Lance. It's just available for, if those situations come up, it's an opportunity to maybe engage. I don't know, it's $5,000, but, you know.
We're trying to show that if we need to cut, if we're expecting other people to cut, we need to cut.
Cut it. I'm fine with that.
So I'll go ahead and strike that $5,000 for next year's budget out of council. All right. All right. City attorneys.
So that's $5,000 in a budget of how much? So
Not
what
much.
percentage of that is? So what so we're expecting a 5%? Yeah. No, but I mean, percentage of dollars, what is that? So we can say every department needs to give that percentage cut.
Maybe 2%, maybe less than 2%.
Yeah, it's like 2.7,
Yeah.
it looks like.
Yeah. All right, well, city attorney's budget for next year is going up by $100,000. Majority of that is on the legal counsel side. Their budget is proposed for $655,000 for next year. I was told by the city attorney that there's two drivers that's driving these costs. It's really personnel investigations, disputes, and then labor negotiations that are continuing. He is decreasing the litigation budget by $70,000, and then just slightly increasing the code enforcement budget by $10,000 to $30,000 next year.
Paul, if I can interject, I think it's fair to lump the first two together. That's really driving the pretty much $100,000 increase. The other main driver, other than the ongoing personnel issues, which I think it's not inaccurate to say that the flurry of these personnel matters over the last 4 years is not business as usual for any city, let alone El Segundo. So the other main driver is the Boy Scout litigation, which you've been briefed on, which is uninsured and not in the liability fund portion of the budget where I understand ICRMA litigation costs are covered. So that's why it's part in this portion of the city attorney agenda budget.
Joaquin, have you added in the potential Puckett lawsuit if that were to be filed? Has that been considered in your budget?
Yeah, that's factored in, and so that's why I look at legal counsel plus litigation as potential. So lumping those together, but I think those are the big question marks: Puckett, and the Boy Scout litigation as far as special counsel.
And those are uninsured?
Yes.
Okay, so we are facing two lawsuits, one of which, despite our efforts to come to a reasonable settlement, we may not. And it's a fundamental question of what we do to keep our community safe. And so for that reason, I think as a city council, we need to be prepared to make some tough decisions, which may need more funding of attorneys to defend our city and, you know, what we think of as local control and what we believe is required to keep our citizens safe. And so for that, I would say we increase this budget by $200,000 next year as a placeholder, worst case scenario. Just so when we're having our closed session meetings, the only argument is how much money it's gonna cost to do the right thing. I want us to be thinking about what is the right thing to do, and then we do that.
Councilmember Baldino, if we go to trial and we lose that suit, which hoping is unlikely, but if that were to happen, how much, what is that looking like? Do we have an idea?
This is on closed session tomorrow.
Yeah. I guess to Councilmember
yeah.
Baldino's, do you feel confident that we have enough money allocated for the two pending significant lawsuits we have? That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are our best estimate, given where we are. And mind you, we're on the granular level, but the city attorney budget with the extra $100,000 is still less than 1% of the entire expenditures. So relatively speaking, despite the adjustment, that's the context, but with the adjustment, I think that's a fair estimate of what we're looking at on the horizon.
If you're happy with the budget, I'm happy with the budget. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Appreciate that.
And I could always come back during mid-year and adjust that if we are 4 or 5 months into the fiscal year and we need to make that adjustment as well.
Sure.
So, that option's there. Okay. So I'm going to keep city attorney's budget as is, proposed. Moving on to city clerk's budget. Next year's budget is $676,000. Personnel is going up by 15%, M&O by 46%. No change in personnel positions. On the personnel side, it's just the main increases, they're contractual increases. And then also, as I mentioned, I didn't add a 5% vacancy factor to their budget. On the M&O side, we are having elections in November, so they are including those costs in part of their M&O. Small increase here on the Muni Code, $3,000, $2,000 for ordinance updates, and also additional funding for some training that they're proposing for next year.
So again, on the line item, so you're saying there's no positions changed, but there must have been some kind of positions change because adopted from 23-24 to 24-25, there's a significant increase in salaries, full-time, part-time. So was there someone added in?
No, it's because in the current year, we had a vacancy factor included. For next year, I actually took that vacancy factor out, so that makes that number bigger.
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, if no more questions, I'll move on to city manager's budget. City manager's budget is $2.9 million next year. Their personnel is going up 5%, and their M&O is dropping by 7%. There's a couple of items that I need to highlight for the council. On the personnel side, they are recommending or proposing to convert a community cable program specialist to a media specialist. That's really a title and classification change. Tomorrow night, I know the HR director is coming for that proposal, but there is no budgetary change, no dollar change in that position change. On the M&O, they are decreasing their professional technical line item by $70,000, and that consists of $40,000 for lobbyists. They didn't need that next year. Also $40,000 for Hyperion PR. They're doing that internally, but then an increase on their strategic plan facilitator for $10,000. They also have some one-time item for the van purchase. They're going to purchase it this year, so we don't need that budget next year. They also moved the downtown lighting project budget from city managers to the public works budget. And they also lowered their LAX master plan line item by 15 grand, so it's going from $60,000 to $45,000.
So just clarification,
Yes.
the net reduction of 30K is that van that we said we were going to buy, then we didn't buy?
Yes, so being that it's budgeted this year, that will just carry over to next year if that van is not purchased by the end of
But I thought we
June
were
30th.
reallocating that money because there was money from that we were getting. Is this the same van the electric van that we were going to buy?
The cable news.
It is the media van.
cable
It was like the 70s Chevy Impala they had to replace.
I get it.
I heard it was called the
Which we should
Scooby-Doo
keep for the
van.
teen center somewhere, like a 70s van.
Yes,
Antique.
it's not an EV van, no.
So also the lobbyist, that was the state lobbyist that we were?
Yeah, the Hyperion.
That's Gonzalez.
That was the Gonzalez company that assisted us with all the Hyperion, with the ballot, and the assembly bill for several
Okay.
months, so we will not be needing them next year.
Was that money well spent, in your
Absolutely,
opinion?
Absolutely. They were very instrumental in helping us navigate Sacramento, both during the hearings, behind the scenes. I thought it was very, yes, very significant.
And someone you'd be comfortable with using again if,
Yes.
should it be necessary?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
Thank
Lance,
you.
one thing I'll note though is that, I'm on the Contract Cities Board, Chris is on COG Transportation, and I'm on SCAG Regional Council. They all have lobbyists too, so they do, Sacramento trips. We haven't really participated in that many of them, but that's also where we can lobby. And the COG has talked about, pooling resources for lobbyists too, for regional efforts. I think it was really helpful with Hyperion. I feel like we're in a good space right now though, probably.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
You know, without a pending bill, there's no need for us to have a separate lobbyist, but they were very helpful arranging introductions, meetings, just answering questions about what do we do next? How do we get this next hurdle crossed through this commission or whatever it is? And, you know, that bill got through in record time, so it was good work.
Yeah.
And then on the downtown lighting, were we not using the Arts and Culture Fund money?
Yes, in addition to this 25,000, I think we had about 60,000 total for the lights.
Okay, there's some other M&O changes in the city manager's budget. There's just an increase in their dues and subscriptions, as I mentioned earlier, removing the SBC COG, the dues into city manager's budget. There's also $12,800 in Monday.com, and also a $5,000 for startup market data platform subscription costs that's included. They're increasing their travel and training budget by $9,000, and also an $8,000 for social media monitoring service, and that's on their professional and technical line item that they're increasing. They're decreasing their positions by 0.75. That's just being that they're requesting that new position or a reclassification of that current position that I mentioned earlier from a community cable program specialist to a media specialist. All right, moving on to finance department. My department's budget is $2.9 million next year. We are expecting a 12% increase in personnel and a 24% increase in M&O. Regards to personnel, there's just really two main drivers besides the contractually obligated items that are going up. I do have more staff taking on the city's medical plans paid by the city, so that budget is reflected going into next year. And also, the risk manager used to reside, or a portion of my time was being charged to the risk general liability fund, but being that it's no longer under my department, we're taking that portion of the general fund cost and moving it back into the finance department's budget. On the M&O side, the only real line item that's going up is my professional and technical. We have that ERP system that we are going to be working on in the next couple of years, and I do need temps to come in to backfill, as most of my staff will be working on implementing the ERP. But then, of course, they have to continue to do their day-to-day, so I do need that temp backfill to do the day-to-day jobs as well. $50,000 for HDL sales tax. That's really 100% recoverable. We just wanted to make sure we reflect their budget properly. And then $15,000 for GovInvest. This cost is actually shared with HR. This is a costing module that the council will be able to utilize during your negotiations to kind of see what the costs are in real time. And it's a great tool. I've seen it. And Rebecca and I want to keep that. It's a 3-year contract. We're going into a 2nd-year contract with them.
And then real quick, on the ERP system, the
Yes.
project manager to lead that project, does that sit under IT?
That's
The budget for that?
currently it's in our equipment replacement. We set aside $1.1 million for this project. The project manager piece should be coming out of there. Now, operationally, maybe move it back into finance department, but currently it's in our equipment replacement fund budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
And we'll be coming to council in
That
June.
we're not underfunding that.
No, my predecessor did a great job setting aside money for that project. It is going to be a long, drawn process, but we are eager to start that, and we'll be bringing it to council in June for that project, for the contract execution. Human Resources, their budget is $2.2 million next year. Their personnel is going up 9%. Their M&O is relatively flat. Really, there's just on the personnel side, the main driver is some of that allocation for the risk manager that was in the general liability side. We're just cleaning up that budget. And then their M&O is just a status quo budget, no real change there.
All right, so I have a question on that. I know Rebecca's here. Are we staffed to where we want to be there? Have we appropriated, or I guess, allowed for the staffing model to be what it needs to be? Because I know this has been a consistent problem.
If we're fully staffed, we have a total of 7, including myself. Right now, we had a new person start today, and so we're down 3 more additional bodies, but they are budgeted.
So you have 4 total, well, 3 and a starter today.
Right.
Okay, so we're budgeted for 7.
And
But
I
this is
have,
the thing we're talking about with like planned vacancies, right? Or planned frozen. Are we actively recruiting for it, or is it something that we're holding off? Where are we at?
no, we've been trying.
Trying, okay.
We've been trying, and we have tried, and we have tried a few times.
So that's in here? In other
Yes.
words, okay,
Yes.
gotcha.
Yes.
So to be clear, the budget has the head count you want, we have vacancies within your department still.
Correct.
So once we get fully staffed, she'll be happy. She's asking for everyone she wants, she just gotta hire the right people.
I just can't find them.
Yeah, okay, I got you.
Yeah.
And then Rebecca, one of the things that we had talked about last fiscal year, and was a really big issue, was not issue, but opportunity was, training, management training and expanding the training, because we felt that we weren't building our bench strength internally for promotions. So do you feel that the budget you have today is enough to do that? Because if we don't have proper training and we're not actually grooming our teams and our staff, I just want to make sure your budget encapsulates everything you need there.
Last week, we just concluded a leadership academy, a separate one for supervisors, a separate one for managers. We have done significant training in the last 3 years that I've been here. I feel that the budget is appropriate for training at this point. One thing with the vacancies, when we do have training, employees need to commit to attend the training that we're putting on, and sometimes that becomes difficult. So I think at this point in time, a budget is appropriate for this coming up fiscal year.
So is that part of the review process, that people are taking advantage of these trainings that we're offering? I mean, obviously you can do
Yes.
Okay.
The evaluations, there are different evaluations for different levels of employees, but there's one section that lists all the trainings that the person has taken since their last evaluation period.
And do we have reward systems for people to?
We were considering, because good things to share, to invite the people who just finished the leadership academies to receive their certificates at a council meeting so they can be recognized for that. Thank you.
All right, moving on to IT, or information systems. Their budget is $4.1 million next year. The personnel is going up by 15%, and their M&O is basically flat year over year. On the personnel side, the increase really, this is a cleanup item for the department. So there's an admin specialist position that was approved by council, but the budget was just not added. So we're adding that budget of $92,000. Also, they had an intern position that was approved, but just dollar wasn't there. So I'm adding that budget there. And lastly, the GIS position was always a budget at a step A, but best practice is to set it at a step C, meaning that we don't know where they're going to be hired at. So we want to bump that budget up by $30,000 to set budget them at a step C. On the M&O, there are some various items here. The biggest item here is a $169,000 for Palo Alto firewall. From my discussion with the IT director, this was his predecessor had these Palo Alto firewalls installed, but the budget was never added. And so we are asking the council to go ahead and add that budget back in for the hardware. $21,000 in just contractual services that are increasing. but they are decreasing their professional and technical line item by $170,000, and being that they are not requesting the additional professional support as they are working hard to get their staff fully staffed, so they wouldn't need the extra support, temp support basically. And then lastly, the copy machines that are coming back to council tomorrow night, the cost is less for out years, so we are adjusting that budget down. Okay. And no position changes.
So when you say cleanup, you're basically saying this is a position that's already been approved by council, but for whatever reason, we don't have it listed in our budget.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so we're not really adding anything. It's been added. We're just making sure the budget reflects the realities of what council has already decided and approved.
Yes, absolutely. It was a position that was already included in the budget, just the dollars were not included. So we're adding the dollars back in.
Understood.
Yes.
Okay.
These are not new positions, no. Community development, their budget is $3.9 million next year. Their personnel is going up by 11%, and their M&O is actually decreasing by 23%. Another cleanup item to Councilmember Baldino's question. Yes, this is another code enforcement officer, a part-time position that should have always been there, but for some reason it was dropped last year or this year's budget. So we're going ahead and adding that budget back in.
Real quick on that, you said that's a part-time position?
Yes.
So we had a conversation recently, I believe, about those part-time positions that we really needed to structure the department. Because we've all, I think it was a closed session meeting where we talked about the part-time positions, and that we should be looking at bigger picture, and that code enforcement should be bringing in revenue. Did we not talk about maybe making that a full-time position? Didn't we have that conversation? I just want to make sure we're addressing the issue, the conversation we had in closed session.
I have an item tomorrow night on the agenda for the establishment of the part-time code enforcement officer. Last year it was approved as 1.0 FTE under the part-time section. So that could be as many bodies, add up to 40 hours a week. So we did meet and confer with the Labor Association. That was added to the CEA unit. And so that's the item I have tomorrow night.
And just to answer your question, Councilmember Pertzek, about the full-time versus part-time, a couple of years ago, it was expressed that there was a desire for nights and weekend coverage. And so after we did some analysis of what the best positions would be to provide weekend and night coverage, we landed on part-time. It gives us better flexibility to shift hours. A full-time position works the traditional Monday through Friday, 7 to 5, and so that's not what we're looking for at this time. Certainly happy to come back after we actually hire a couple of folks and reassess whether a full-time is necessary, but first phase of that is really to accomplish the nights and weekends coverage.
Just on the M&O side, their overall department is decreasing next year, and there's just a few items here. Their professional technical line item is decreasing by $150,000 for next year. And then the remaining three items are just a budgetary move from the department to Rec and Park Library's budget. And you'll see that increase on their side later down on the few slides when we get there. And the 0.5 FTEs is that code and compliance officer position that we're just adding back into the budget that should have always been there.
So real quick, those three items that we're moving to Rec Park, the
Yes.
senior, the juvenile, and the delivered meals, why were they in community development? And why, wasn't that always a Parks and Recs?
Long before my time, these three programs were funded through CDBG, which is federal funding that's funneled through the county. Back in the day, you could spend a significant more amount of the CDBG allocation on administrative programs or these support programs. The county, the feds and the county have capped that at 15%. When they capped that at 15% about 10 years ago or so, a lot of agencies who used to fund programs like these through CDBG funded it through the general plan because it was a better use of the funds to allocate the CDBG money towards actual capital improvements like the ADA projects or other types of projects that are eligible costs. So CDBG used to be funded, or actually, I'm sorry, it's always been managed through community development, but when the funds were moved to being funded by the general fund, the programs themselves were never moved over to Rec Park, which, to your point, have always been programmed and managed through Rec Park, but we've always carried the cost and Rec Park's always managed the programming. So this is more of just cleanup. It's a popular word today. Yeah.
All right, moving on to police department. Some additional cleanup, but on the expenditure side, the department's budget is $22.7 million next year. Their increase in personnel is 6%, and their M&O is increasing 3%. And there is an additional full-time position that we will be adding to the budget or propose to the council to consider. And so let me just kind of break that down for the personnel side. The true cost is $137,000 on top of just the contractually obligated items that are going up. First item is the cleanup item. It's the police officer that was always approved by the council, but was just not included in this budget. So we are correcting and cleaning up this budget and adding the police officer. The next item is a true new position. It's additional PSO for the police department. It's $110,000. But for that full-time position, the department did delete or is requesting to delete a police assistant position. And they have a total of 6 police assistants. They currently have 5, so I believe they're requesting to delete 1 to pay for the PSO. And additionally, they're deleting a part-time PSO 2 to cover those additional costs for the full-time PSO.
Paul,
Yes.
do these numbers for next year capture if our police department was able to hire all the new officers we've tasked them to do? Or is this kind of assuming a certain vacancy rate?
It's assuming a 5% vacancy rate. This does not include the 10 overhires that the council did approve.
Okay.
Yes.
Can we look at what those numbers will be?
I would say the quick back of the napkin is you take 176,000 for each police officer, fully cost, and multiply that by 10, and that'll be your best kind of quick math.
That's without the benefit burden though, right?
It's fully
176?
burdened.
Fully,
Yes,
okay,
yes,
wow.
yes. Benefits and salary. Yes. So what is that math?
You said $176,000.
1,000 times 10.
Times 10.
Yeah,
1.7 million.
1.8 million.
Okay.
Yes.
But I think the conversation is how realistic is it that we're going to hire 10 new officers in 1 year?
Well, I think we should make long-term decisions knowing that
Based
we've
on the
already
actual
committed to
number.
spend this money.
Yep.
We want these officers to come and work for the best city in the world. You know, like, we're gonna have the money set aside. So when I look at the police department, I wanna know this is what we've already agreed to spend. So we don't have to clean up next year and say, oh, guess what? We've got more officers.
It might be good to put like an asterisk, already approved, so that there's awareness of that. those
Kind of
10
a
officers.
projected, but
Yeah.
what's been approved is much more than that. Okay. Does that make sense, Paul?
No, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure, you want an asterisk to reference?
No, that, what we can say, because this is what the proposed is, but
Yes.
if we were to hire the 10 new officers, which are approved, we should reflect that somewhere to say, please note,
Gotcha.
10 more officers have been approved, which equals X.
What I can do is, part of the supplemental was the org chart for the departments. On the org chart, I can put an asterisk there and reference that as police officers and say that 10, whatever date the council approved those, and say the dollar cost hasn't been included, and I'll reference that there so that it's at least recorded so that we don't scratch our heads.
Just so I'm clear, colleagues, this was to get to the 72?
72.
So why don't we just get to the 72? Like, then the next question is, what does it take? We did recruiting bonuses in the past of 40,000, whatever the number was. The council's already said we want to get to 72. Crime is a major problem in our city and surrounding us. So let's assume that we're going to get there, and what is it going to cost to get there? I would rather us budget that way. Let's not just Why even approve 72 if we're never gonna get there?
To give you an idea as to where we're at, as I stand today, we're at 56. And we got another officer starting who's lateraling from Chino PD next Monday, puts us at 57. We're aggressively trying to hire to get to that 62 number, which I could project potentially by maybe mid next year. We'll get there, actually end of this year, we'll get to 62. Then after that, we'll start dipping into trying to get to that 72 number. But the problem is we're trying to work and get you the best quality we can get.
Sure.
Our training sergeant is working really hard, recruiting sergeant, to try to get you the best people. But as you know, it's a challenge because we're competing with every other agency in the Southland. So we're doing everything we can to get there, but we've got a lot in the pipeline. I can anticipate us getting to minimally an additional 5 above the 62 by the end of the year. That's my projection based on talking to my captains and where we're at. I would think by the end of the year we'll be at 67.
So Chief, maybe not now, but just what would it take to get to 72? You don't have to really answer now, but that would be my question is it a matter of money and resources? Because if it is, and
it's getting the right people. It's getting the right fit. I'm constantly looking at people, looking at recruitment books, looking at people that we want to hire. We only want to give you the best. And as I mentioned, we're competing with every other agency in the South Bay, in the LA County region. And we don't just want to get laterals. We also want to get cadets that are coming, that are here, that are ready to do the job. So it's a mixture of both. That'll be that fine tune that'll continue to get this culture of the organization to where it needs to be, to continually be the best. And again, it's a matter of finding the right people. We're not going to lower the standards, so they have to go through the entire hiring process. So if we start the process today, I found that we work very, very fast and efficient here. Which is good, because we're immediately capturing a good person who's testing, and we're starting that process very, very quickly. And then the lateral incentive that you approved last fiscal is working. It's definitely working to our benefit to know that we currently have 10 officers in the training program, 9 to 10, I think the number's fluctuated. But come next week, I'll have 10. For an agency our size, that's a lot. So much so that we need to find more training officers to fill that need. So we are doing everything we can to get that number as high as we possibly can.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
But no, I agree. We should know what that fully burdened cost is if we're going to use this type of budget to look ahead 5-6 years.
And just real quick, on the police, how many canines do we have, canine units? 2? Do we have 2 canine units?
We're going to have 2, but right now we only have 1 that's actually working. So we're going to fill that assignment once we get our patrol numbers to an adequate number. Our main priority is to do that.
Would it be helpful to expand the canine units?
2 is
just
sufficient.
in the short term until we get additional officers, like?
No, the main goal is to get our patrol numbers up to the good number that we need.
Uh-huh.
Because right now we tend to run on minimums, and minimums not something that you want to keep going for too long.
Right.
Because that stresses out those that are working. So we want to get our staffing numbers on our regular patrol levels up, and then we start looking at our specialized units.
Chief, while you're up there, we
Sure.
talked recently a lot about technology in our first public safety subcommittee. Is there technology budgeted for you to look at drone as a first response and some of the other technologies that we've been exploring?
There is some money there within what you call the COPS grants and the asset forfeiture money. So there's some stuff that I can work with for now. At some point, I will be coming to you to ask for more money, but right now, I think given what I have in our current budgets, I can work with that.
Okay. Do you think you'll be coming, though, in this next budget cycle before us for money? Because if so, we should probably have a placeholder
No,
for that.
probably
too.
not this one again. If we use anything that we're going to use, it'll be using our asset forfeiture and then our COPS funding.
Okay.
I would anticipate that.
All right, thank you. You know, to Councilor Baldino's point, though, the 10-year projection is based on right now. And so if we're building a baseline that includes vacancies of 14, what is it, 56, we're at 56, we're at 16, all the future years are based on that same baseline. So I strongly encourage us to adjust that going forward. If we heard that a year and a half from now, 2 years, we're going to be fully staffed up with 72 officers, that would change the 10-year projection.
No, the 10-year does include that assuming a 5% vacancy throughout that 10-year.
I think we, yeah.
No, not 10 added for police, no.
I think what the mayor's saying is that we should assume that we're trying to get to the additional 10.
Gotcha, I see what you mean, gotcha, yeah. Okay, I could add that into the forecast and get you a picture of how it looks like.
Great.
That's your $2.5 million.
All right. For both public safety, both fire, police and fire, I've included just a chart regards to, or a table regards to overtime, because the overtime conversation continues to occur. And just wanted to shed some light here. For next year, the department is budgeting $1.1 million in overtime. And as you can see, historically looking back, our current adopted versus the actuals, over 4 years, they're a little over $1 million in overtime. And the department, for the past 4 years, have been on their vacancy has been about 6 officers in the past 4 years. So some of that, of course, is just adding to the overtime. And also the increase in overtime also is as salaries go up, overtime, of course, at a time and a half goes up as well. So that's a context that I wanted to kind of show the council that where they are in regards to their overtime budget next year. M&O, just their changes on their M&O side. There's just various items that are going up for the department. Their equipment replacement fund is going up $176,000, and that's just their recent 7 vehicle purchases. We're putting aside money for future replacement, so that is that bump up there. Their contract services is going up $154,000 and comprised of these 4 items below. Their South Bay Regional Public Communications Authority dispatch is going up. That's a total budget of $2.1 million for next year, but it's going up $92,000 next year. The INSBJPA, or the Interoperable Network of the South Bay Joint Powers Authority. It's a mouthful, but there's 2 components that are increasing. One is the kind of the relocation of the water tower antenna. It's going from Manhattan Beach to Chevron, and that cost is being spread to all the agencies in the South Bay. And also another $21,000 in just annual maintenance increase in their expected expenditures for next year, so they're spreading that cost throughout the agencies. And then a $7,000 increase in animal sheltering services for next year. But there is a decrease in this is just a one-time capital item that was budgeted this year. This is actually old developer impact funds that are just going to go right back into their fund balance for their old developer impact fees. That won't be carried over to next year's budget. Just position-wise, FT, as I mentioned, they're only going up by 1, and those are the various positions that are 2 adds, 1 minus, and then the part-time positions equals to that 1 position, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, on the fire department's budget, their total budget is $15 million next year. Their personnel is going up 5%. Their M&O is going up 9%. And their positions, net-wise, they're going up by 0.25, and I'll explain what that is. On their personal side, they're going up 51%, $51,000. Besides the contractually obligated items that are going up, there's a couple of things that are triggering that. There's a reclassification of their current admin specialist to a senior admin specialist, and that's a $13,500 increase. The true new position that they're asking for, as I mentioned earlier, is the licensed permit specialist 2, a cost of $39,000 or $34,000. This is fully cost recovered through revenues, so we'll be able to cover those costs. But they are requesting to delete one of their admin positions. That's a savings of $4,000 next year. Fires overtime. So the chief and I and the city manager, we worked hard to just kind of figure out what's the best way to kind of forecast out overtime so that it makes sense moving forward. So currently, there's only 2 overtime categories, overtime and FLSA overtime. But what we did was we broke that out into 5 categories for next year. It's in that professional development coverage and unplanned, FLSA, safety, staffing coverage, and reimbursable. As you can see, historically, looking back up to the last 2 years, fire has been approximately $2.2 million in overtime. And historically, they've been at about 4 firefighter vacancies, kind of doing their backfill. And so as they fill in these positions, naturally and hopefully, the overtime will decrease. but there is just a cost of doing business and providing fire services, and overtime is just one contributing factor of providing that service.
So real quick, so during the COVID years, right, we were told that overtime was needed because of COVID, and there was a lot of, you know, the fire was called upon to do a lot of things, and we need, so it's interesting that the 21, 22, the overtime has just consistently been going up and up and up. And now it's unplanned at $395,000, when we're not in a COVID year. And I understand that we have issues, we're trying to get some hires, but I just want to make sure, like, COVID was a special time, and we wanted to support that, but now I just want to make sure that we're not, just because we did it then, doesn't mean we should be doing it now.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. To explain the overtime situation, when I walked in, it was very nebulous, if you will, because there's only two categories. So we wanted to parse this out so it made a better explanation. And to your point, council member Perstuck, the COVID years of 21, 22 were exacerbated because we had these pods and people had to go out and serve the community. But then secondly, it was also exacerbated because we had 5 members that were off on long-term leave, if you will, of various kinds. But since then, it's really come down. We don't have anybody on long-term leave as of today. And then, so if you look at the trend, it's actually gone down. And then the last part of this is we do have vacancies. We have 4, and as all of you know, that because of the way the pay is structured, time and a half for somebody working overtime is less expensive per shift from the fully burdened rate of that individual. So for those 4. But we are working very diligently with HR to fill those vacancies so the overtime will continue to go down individually and collectively. Okay, thank you.
All right. On their M&O side, they're requesting a command vehicle, $204,000. This is not really general fund. This is from 2 funding sources: Old Developer Impact Fee Money, DIF, and then ERF is the Equipment Replacement Fund to pay for the remaining portion of that. They're increasing their professional technical by $140,000 for mainly plan check, and that's fully recoverable, and that's reflected in their revenues. The equipment replacement fund is bumped up by $48,000, and that's really just due to natural cost of increases of vehicles, and so we wanted to put additional money aside so that they can replace their equipment in the near future. The communications budget is going up $34,000, and that's that INSB JPA item that I mentioned on the PD side as well, because that's 50-50 shared by both police and fire. They also are asking for $30,000 for some repairs for their fire lobby at the front of their fire department. And one that's not really reflected here, but the chief had wanted me to mention, was the $8,000 for AEDs. It's also budgeted in their budget for next year as well. There's some decreases here. It's a one-time decrease. This is EOC project, $107,000. That's just for this year. So we don't want to budget that next year. It will be a natural just carryover if not done. And then just ongoing software. The way we do software, our budget software, is that the first year it sits in the department's budget, and in the subsequent years we move it to the IT. So you see that increase on the IT side, but decrease on the departmental side for ongoing software. Position-wise, okay. On the position side, as I mentioned, they're going up by 0.25, and really it's just they're asking for that new position of a 0.5 for a part-timer, but then they're getting, they're deleting an admin intern of 0.25, so they're only going up by 0.25. All right.
So one of the things I was, the repairs, the $30,000 for the main lobby.
Yes.
I just want to, so one of the things we've been talking about or at least I've been talking about, and as Mr. Pimentel has mentioned, you know, we always say honor the Brown Act because he knows what we've been talking about, but I've been asking the city manager to look at, you know, if we're gonna start looking at putting money into activation of the quad here, out here, one of the things was to help facilitate that activation and replanning is to move the front entrance of the police department to the front, to the main street here, because having it, the front entrance to the police department, from a resident's perspective, it's very hard to get to. Like, I remember walking my senior mother to the police station, and it's a long walk. So if we are thinking about doing something like that, that would require, obviously, construction, and that could also impact the construction of the fire department. So I was wondering what that 30,000 is. I just don't spend money if it's gonna be a bigger project.
Chief, do you
I
wanna
guess is what
answer that
I should have started with.
Thank you, Elias. To explain the $30,000, this is really about security in the lobby. We've had recent issues of people walking in that were very, I would say, security, I guess, a threat. So what we need to do is reinforce that front lobby so we can be business friendly, yet safe for our employees.
Gotcha.
All right, so and this goes for actually police and fire. One of the things we talked about, I believe it was a year, maybe a year plus ago, was understanding that there's a cost that goes into the litigation and defending ourselves against lawsuits and things like that. And the idea is that the cost of those was gonna be line item in the particular departments. So right now, everything's under the city attorney's office. But we talked about saying, okay, you know, we had to fight X amount of lawsuits. We technically won at a cost of $3 million or whatever it would be, but that's all part of those individual departments. So I don't see that here. I was wondering if we're still sticking with that concept, should that be added in as a discussion point? Because that's really what it is. You're looking at the city attorney's office saying, well, God, we're putting an awful lot of money in the city attorney's office. Well, there's a reason for that. The reason is we are fighting lawsuits from, you know, point A, B, and C. Is there still an appetite to do that?
I guess the question would be, historically, if it's reasonable to assume that one of the costs of being a full-service city is you just have to budget in a certain number of personnel lawsuits. It's a little bit weird is probably the wrong term, but just because it seemed to be a statistical outlier of a year, right? That we didn't have any employee lawsuits, and all of a sudden we had 9, I think. So if we want to infer or say that, look, if we're doing this to plan a 10-year baseline, that one of the costs of doing business is you have to factor in a certain number of public safety lawsuits, that's just part of a cost to assume, then it may be reasonable. I don't know. I don't know. Do we have a litigation line item for these departments? Would we add it in and just say that, you know, the portion of this is $250,000? City attorney, what are your thoughts?
I think we could segregate just in departmental buckets as far as, okay, this department is incurring this amount of litigation costs specific to personnel. I think that's something that could be produced if there is an appetite.
Do we do it that way, or do we just do it under the city attorneys, and then you just have to line item it under that, saying, okay, out of the, you know, our actual for 23, 24, this is what our proposed, this is what our actual was, and this is how it breaks down?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's feasible.
Is that an easier way to do it?
So you're saying, as opposed to parking it in the...
Yeah, no, it's keep it under city attorney, but I think we all want to have just visibility to what it's actually costing.
Sure.
Is that...
I think it depends, Lance, on what are the budgets being used for. So if I'm a department head and I'm being held accountable to a budget, and I know that historically we've had X thousands of dollars for litigation and legal expense in your particular budget, the incentive is to do better than what your budget is. So I would prefer, from a reporting and accountability standpoint, that it's in the actual department rather than lumped into legal. There's just not visibility to it there. But if I'm reviewing actuals versus a budget and I'm looking at how did I manage this organization, one of those significant line items has been for us in the last decade or last few years, public safety lawsuits and other lawsuits.
I think we can work with Paul and Daryl to see the best way to maneuver that, but make sure that that's information provided, so you have that context.
Currently, the way the invoice is broken down is by department, but we just book it to kind of the line item of general counsel, litigation, but we don't go into that detail, but there is an invoice that comes in monthly that breaks down into each of the departments' costs.
Does the same hold true for workers' comp?
Ooh, I have
Because
not
workers'
seen it.
comp also, I mean, if I'm a leader,
Mhm.
what I want to do, I want to reduce workers' comp through morale, safety, training, everything else.
Mhm.
Physical fitness with my employees, so a leader can influence workers' comp over time. So
Yes.
shouldn't that also be in an individual department budget?
I have not seen an workers' comp invoice yet. I might have to.
There's a line item for police and fire. It's 4203. For each year, it says workman's comp
Every department has a worker comp line
number.
item.
Okay.
Yes, that we do.
But it's not, you're saying it's not necessarily historical to that budget, it's just a number that's spread, or how is that?
Yes, we just
Okay.
kind of assume how much it was, and then.
Well,
what's
if I
that
was the new
percentage.
chief, I would want to know, here's historically where it's been, and here's where how I'm doing relative to that. I think, you know?
So the ask, I think there's consensus, excuse me, I agree, is that we would segregate out litigation expenses per department going forward so that we as council know and departments head know, this is what it's costing from personnel issues. How can I do better?
And workers' comp.
And workers' comp.
Understood, thank you.
Just want to make sure, so regards to litigation, we want to have separate budget line items that has litigation. And so we break out the budget from city attorney and into the individual departments for litigation. Just want to make sure I'm on the same page.
And workers' comp. I mean, I know we're doing that for workers' comp, but
Yeah.
based on
Okay.
actual historicals.
Okay, we'll do that. All right. Okay, let's see. Public Works. We got two departments remaining. Public Works, their budget for next year is $9.9 million. Their personnel is going up by 15%, and their M&O is going up by 11%. So there's some various changes on their personnel side for next year. As I mentioned earlier, there was an environmental programs manager of $206,000 that was approved by council back in, it looks like November of 2023, but was never really added to the budget due to timing. So we're adding that position and the budget back in. There's also a cleanup item regards to the senior civil engineer project, being that Public Works has a lot of CIP projects that they need to tackle. And the director mentioned that this position should have always been here, but for some reason it was just dropped. So we're adding this position back in as a cleanup item to the budget. They're also increasing and truly reflecting their overtime for the various divisions. And lastly, an update to their senior engineer associate from a associate engineer and bumping that position up to a senior. On the M&O side, there's some various M&O items that are contributing to that 11% increase. The main increase is their contractual services of $265,000. There's some various items here. On the engineering, inspection, plan check, architectural services is going up by $100,000. But mind you, this is a revenue offset. The department has reflected their revenues to offset these increased costs. On the citywide trash disposal contract, that's going up by $50,000, mainly due to the bulky item pickup. The pool maintenance also is an increase in cost just through the past year. They just seen that increase, so they're reflecting that budget as well. Roof maintenance for the city facilities, they're asking for that budget to be increased there. And then custodial services is also going up by $20,000, so we want to make sure we reflect that budget. Their vehicle operating charge of $170,000 increase, this is really due to their aging infrastructure, pump station vehicles, and fire truck maintenance costs continue to go up, and they need to budget for that accordingly for next year. Continuing on their M&O side, They have, they're asking for a $91,000 increase in their operating supplies. That's just really due to inflationary costs going up. They are all asking for $85,000 for emergency facilities repair, just really due to aging infrastructure. And aquatics electricity charges, they're asking for $20,000 there, being that electricity charges has gone up quite a bit in the past year and two. Lastly, there is a slight decrease here on professional technical side. They are asking for less temp work as they are working vigorously to fill in their vacancies. So they should see a decrease in temp staff there. On the position side, even though it's 2.0 FTE, these are not new positions. These are really, as I mentioned, cleanup items that should have always been included in the budget. Let me rephrase that. Environmental Programs Manager was a position that council did approve. And so we're adding that, but then the civil engineer, the senior civil engineer should have always been there. And we're just reflecting that and adding that position back into the budget.
Elias, I would ask the same question I asked to Rebecca. We have an awful lot of CIPs. You are like on stage for the next 5 years with everything we have going on. Do you have enough people?
I believe once we can recruit this senior civil engineer, we'll be in good shape.
Because the thing is, we know we have these programs in a pipeline. We know they're coming online.
Right.
And I have a feeling that generally, I think this is the way most governments work. You kind of wait till you have a need, then you fill it. We know we're going to need.
Right.
So rather than chasing our tail all the time, can we get out in front of this? And
Yes.
if you feel you need someone else, and I believe full-time is the way to go, by the way,
Right.
we need more skill in this.
Right.
I just wouldn't be shy asking for it.
Sure. So thank you so much. First of all, I appreciate that support. But once we fill in that senior civil engineer, we'll be in much better off. And should we go through the program and you know, I feel like I need more help, I'll come to you. I won't be shy about it. But thank you so much for your support.
But, and do you, if, for project managers for like the plunge, and we have the Parks and Recs, where's that sitting, that budgetary items? Those are those on the
Contracts are all executed for the construction of the plunge, for construction management of the plunge, for construction of the entry feature. All those items are behind us and we are going forward.
But we still need to manage the construction as
That is
Lance was
correct.
mentioning. So do we have the staff to manage those?
Well,
projects?
for the plunge,
Yep.
we already for the plunge, we recruited, thanks to the city council, a consulting firm that is helping us with the construction of the plunge. They'll be here every day.
Consulting firm or a project manager?
It's a project manager.
Thank you.
It's a
Don't call
consulting
it
firm, but
consulting firm,
construction,
it's-
correct.
Yeah, it's.
Sorry about
that's a
that.
bad word.
Construction management, yeah. And for the rec park, it's in the design phase. Once we get to the construction, we're probably gonna do the same thing. For the entry.
Okay, probably, or we will?
We will.
We will.
We will, most likely. We
No,
will.
we will.
We will.
We will.
I thought you guys don't like consulting firms. No, I'm just kidding.
We don't, we want project managers.
Managers, yeah. And then for the entry feature, we already are recruiting, as part of the construction, a project manager that is gonna be checking the construction of the entry feature.
No, he's telling us what we want to hear, that when we have large capital improvement projects, we will have a professional construction management team as our advocate out there, making sure things are getting done on time, on budget. And I appreciate that. I appreciate what you do, Elias.
And then one other thing, do we have, I know not just for your department, Parks and Recs, police, there's a lot of grant money out there. Do we have someone dedicated to seeking dollars?
Yes, we always do. We are in constant communication with our consulting firm. We always are in touch.
But do we have someone dedicated to writing and seeking money?
Yes, I believe so. And
Okay.
we do, and we in
Who's
turn.
that person?
It's called California Consulting Services. They've been with Elias's shop now for several years.
Right.
And when we see grants, they facilitate the writing of the grant, the following up on the grant. But for grants, like through Ted Liu's office, we do those pretty much internally. Like recently, we submitted, I think, 5 projects under this latest call for projects. And so a lot of them we do in-house, but for like the specialty ones, we'll go through California Consulting.
Right. And the way it works, California consulting firm, they have different programs, and we meet constantly. But once we locate a good grant to chase, we defer that consulting firm to the appropriate department and we hook them up with the right person in that department because they have to fill in the application, and the person from that department would be far better than us because they know the details. So that's how it works.
But it wouldn't behoove us to actually have a dedicated person or that crosses over the departments,
We have used
looks
that,
out
yes.
for grants.
We actually have that person, Marizan, in the city manager's office, who's kind of a special projects coordinator, monitors all of the grants. In fact, she submitted the applications to Ted Liu's office. She helps write the grants. She's following up now and does work with the individual departments, not only on grants, but special projects too that the departments need help on.
Yeah, including the plunge, and it's working out really well. She's very knowledgeable, and she's awesome.
Rec and Park and Library. I actually broke out Rec and Park for its own budget and then Library's budget separately. So the budget for Rec and Park is $8.2 million next year. The personnel is going up by 2% and M&O by 11%. This regards to positions, there is that one position that I'll go into detail regards to they're adding to on full-time side. Not a new position, but also on the part-time, as I discussed earlier, regards to kind of clean up on their lifeguard positions. So on the personnel side, there's 2 items that are contributing to the personnel. $205,000 is for their lifeguard hiring program. This was presented by the HR director to the Aquatics Committee, I believe last week. But and I have an actual second slide to give you that detail of how we get to this 205, but this is actually a program that was proposed, and it's actually coming back to council tomorrow night for further discussion. But this budget was added during this proposed budget. And then we are including the aquatics manager that was approved by council back in June of 23 after the budget was adopted, so we are adding that position into next year's budget. Regards.
If I can just add, though, with the discussion we had today on the aquatics manager position, we will be having internal conversations about that regarding some of the comments that came up this evening.
So can I just ask, the lifeguard hiring program is gonna cost us $204,000. Does that include hiring people, or is that just the program? Is that just the mechanics of creating the program?
Here it is, right, the slide.
Those are the increases to the wages. There is no change in HR staff to hire these people. This is an item that's coming before you tomorrow night. These haven't been adjusted since they were approved December of 2020, and the raises went into effect January 2021. There is minimum wage has eroded the salaries here. We are competing against LA County, who's paying $23.57 for their lifeguards. We also, as you know, have the increased minimum wage of $20 for some fast food workers. We have received a couple of comments from people who declined positions stating that they could make more in fast food. So this is an item for discussion for tomorrow.
So just for clarification for everybody that's listening, that's $204,000, not to bring any new people on.
No.
I mean, that doesn't include any new FTEs.
No.
It's just $204,000 to sustain.
Yes. The
Well,
operations.
yeah, we're
of the
basically
Aquatics Center.
increasing our operating expenses by $200,000, and then with escalators for the next 10 years. To adjust the wages, it sounds like, right?
Exactly, but also we have not filled all of the hours that have been budgeted, so this includes that.
this is just to fill the hours that we need to run the pool, if I'm not mistaken, right? And
Correct.
that's all it is. That's how dire the situation's become.
So it may or may not be 204,000. It depends if we can get enough people to fill it. The difficulties, one of the main difficulties is that the pool is open staff hours from 5 a.m. until like 10 o'clock at night. And so we've been hiring a lot of high school people, but they're in school, and then they have club swim and they have practice. So they can't work during the day. So in addition to being more competitive with an increase to the wage, we should be able to attract people who are available to work during the day and who are not high school students.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
All right, on the M&O side for Recreation and Park, the contractual services going up 88,000, and this is really just moving budget from community development over to Rec and Park. 30,000 for Meals and Wheels, 25,000 ways right home care, 17,000 for, this is not from community development, but this is increase in special events, 17,000, and $15,000 from South Bay Children's Health Center. The department is also asking for a $56,000 increase into their professional technical line item. This is really for the contract instructors, and of course there's a reimbursement or revenue that comes in to pay for the cost of that, or not all, but portion of that. The 50,000 for automotive and equipment, as the parks have various equipments that are due to be expired, but also to be replaced. So they are bumping that budget up by $50,000 for next year. They're asking for $45,000 in operating supplies, mainly just driven by cost increasing, but also $20,000 in the Hilltop bathroom fixture and $6,000 in downtown baskets here in downtown El Segundo. And then lastly, $10,000 increase in repairs and maintenance is strictly for their Garden East plot program that they want to redo to gain some more traction over there.
Real quick, when's the last time we renegotiated our parks maintenance contract? Because I know that there was some opportunity there that hadn't been renegotiated in a while, and I just wanted to really understand that.
Yes, so it's, I think it was in 2021, and it expires in 2025, but we are just reviewing it now. We can make changes, I think, with 30-day notice, so that's something we're looking into. We just had a meeting last week with Councilmember Giroux and my park maintenance team to really dive into the scope. It wasn't as clear as it probably should have been in the original contract, so we're looking at that and seeing if we need to make changes.
I believe there's several things that they should have been doing over these past 3 years that they have not been doing.
Correct, or not doing as regularly as we had hoped, because the scope wasn't as detailed as it needed to be.
And are you doing an RFP out to see if there's another bidder? Because I know that the other big entity in town is the school district, and they changed to they're using. I just
They
want
use Brightview.
Yeah. So are we doing RFP? Because I think if we haven't getting the service and it's time to renegotiate, I think we would behoove us to do some type of RFP out there.
I think that's what we will end up doing.
Yes, these are very, very timely questions because we are in the process of reviewing their contract, and as Director Mancini said, the scope of work is not as tight as it should be. So we're going back and looking through each and every item. So we may be back with a new RFP to let for those services.
All right, you can stay there.
Yeah, I
I had
figured.
questions.
Sure.
I'm a little surprised to not see the request for additional headcount. Actually, I'm not a little surprised. I'm really surprised.
For additional staffing?
Yeah.
My understanding was we were to keep a flat line on staffing.
Okay,
I
again,
would-
I hear you.
Please ask.
I'm not upset with you. I'm just saying that, I think we mentioned this at the last few council meetings. We're about ready to put between Rec Park and the Plunge, $50+ million worth of public money into redoing all this, and we barely have the staff to do what we have right now. So
correct.
something has to give. We can't continue to increase all of these things and not adequately staff it. I do believe that we should start pushing more towards skilled full-time employees at Rec Park. At night, we don't have enough supervision out there at all. I don't know if whether we have to go to, I don't want to have to rely on having, you know, for the chief to have to throw an officer in there where they got a lot of things to worry about. We have to have something going on. We got to fix what we have. We're offering so much to the community as far as services and leagues and things like that, but we haven't upped the staff. So I would really like to look into what do you really need to run this properly. That's a major piece for me anyway.
Yeah, I think it's two-pronged. We need to fill our vacancies, but it's a similar issue that we have with, which Director Reddick was mentioning with part-timers, is very difficult. They're young, they have school schedules, their availability changes every few months. And I think that looking at potentially converting some of our part-time into full-time would be helpful, but there's a budgetary impact.
Yeah, I understand, but I think we have to, and I understand, believe me, I understand the idea of looking at budget, but
Right.
in certain cases, when we literally do not have a senior staff member on at night when all the leagues are running, that's problematic.
Correct.
And if it's a matter of, you know, I know a lot of people within Park and Rec, if it's a matter of taking someone that's part-time, that has the ability or desire to go full-time that you can use, we have to look at this. There's so many issues going on in there at night.
I appreciate
And
that.
the only time we find out about us through the El Segundo Community Network or the Parents Network. And, you know, honestly, I'd rather hear from our staff before I'm hearing from, you know, Facebook, to be honest with you, with these issues sometimes. So I think we can help fix that. I really would like to dive into that.
I really appreciate that. I think that would be incredibly helpful. I think
Because
it's a lot
again,
of-
I'm also gonna draw the fact that with the plunge opening up, you're gonna, you know, everything we just talked about with lifeguards, you're gonna have to double that.
Right.
You have to double staff. So you can't even get to where you're at now. We gotta double staff. We gotta start doing that now.
And do we have park rangers, you know,
We do not.
because I
So-
know like the district has park rangers.
Right.
Who keep an eye on things at night. I mean, is that rather than using, you know, the police force to do surveillance, would it be not cheaper to do some type of park rangers on after hours?
Yeah, that's something we've actually been looking to see what other cities do. We have what is called a park rover, and it's basically just a part-time employee who goes around. They don't have any authority. I think it's something we should definitely look at because as Councilmember Drew mentioned, most of our issues are happening at night and on the weekends when my team isn't here. My part-timers are here doing the best they can, but I think we absolutely need a higher level of skill if we're going to address these issues when the park is most busy.
And summer's coming up, kids are out of school, and those issues are gonna compound.
Correct. So
I got a quick question.
appreciate that.
Ryan, did you have some? Oh, when we shut down the plunge, did we reduce headcount? Because theoretically, you got how many employees in the plunge back then? Lifeguards and staff. I mean, we had.
Yeah, we reduced the head count at that time, yes,
We did.
yes.
Okay.
But it is going, I mean, as Councilmember Drew stated.
I
when
don't
we-
remember us doing that, specifically reducing headcount back then.
It
Um,
probably would have been part-time employees who
It would
just
be
weren't getting
part-timers.
hours.
Yeah, it's
So
just-
it's not like a full-time head count, it's just, we don't have so many lifeguarding hours because we don't have one more pool.
Okay, yeah.
Remember, that's kind of like, what year did we close the
I
plunge?
think it was 2019,
And when did the
2020?
aquatic center open up?
2019.
So it was
they were-
only, there wasn't a lot of time in between, so they transferred over.
Right.
But I would like to look at a park ranger, if you could propose something to Lance's thought. I think it would behoove us it would be cheaper to have a park ranger than using the police force. But I think we need to have some type of presence in our parks at night. And then the other thing is, and I know there's county money for homelessness, working with homeless. One of the things, one of our new strategies is to make sure all departments are trained on how to deal with homeless. But is there, I'm not saying homeless are the number one reason of our issues at our parks, but there could be some funds available to maybe help pay the price for some of these park rangers so that we can help offer services.
Yeah, we could definitely look into that. I could talk with the chief and see what some of the other agencies are doing.
Yeah.
But I think having a park ranger position, we've talked about it internally, would be wonderful, especially with the issues at Campus El Segundo.
Is anyone, do we want to give her guidance in that direction, or how do you
Yeah, I
guys feel?
was gonna propose, I agree with what Lance and Carol are saying. And I get, for budget, if the marching order was keep your head count where it is, but it sounds like the dais wants to hear your thoughts on how your department could be reorganized with a more professional staff. And maybe that's gonna be your marching order to come back with us, at whatever time it takes, to look at what a new, refreshed Parks and Recreation Department looks like.
I appreciate that.
I would like to hear your thoughts and your input from your staff, because we hear bits and pieces about the understaffing of lifeguards and issues with pickleball. And, my kids work at the park department. Their schedules are very impacted. And I get the problems of relying on an 18-year-old. Like, it's not easy.
Right.
So
I agree.
I'm agreeing with council, or at least a consensus here, that we would like to hear from you on what maybe a more professional-looking Parks and Recreation staff would look like, even with those budgetary concerns, so that we can plan on having adequate staff to not only provide the services, but to Lance's point, if we're going to put money into these parks, we want them maintained. We want them to be nice. We don't want to be behind the ball and trying to catch up. So it's a lot of work. Your department's going to have a lot of individuals, so let's get you the help you need to deliver the best results.
Thank you.
And, I know that we put in the Acacia Park about 2 years ago now. Has it been 2 years?
Couple years.
And it was amazing, it was new, and it's being visited quite a bit.
Right.
So as we update these parks, are we maintaining them to the level that we want them to be? And so I just want to make sure we're putting the appropriate budget on that maintenance, because I know, like, the Acacia Park is being visited by many, many children, and when you have many, many children, things go wrong. So let's make sure that we're putting the proper maintenance and upkeep into the parks as well.
Yeah, and
'Cause I
I've
would
been-
hate for it to come back 5 years from now, oh my God, we need to redo it completely. If you maintain it consistently, then you don't have to do a redo.
I think that's one of the things you'll see when we go into the CIP is we have asked for funding so that we can make sure we're replacing and repairing on a more timely schedule, because we've kind of not done that well. But I also, Liz and I actually, and Linnea met with the county about some Measure A funds that we can use for repair. So we had a really great meeting, so we have some funds that are gonna come our way, and then we will continue to seek those funds annually. So that's something we've done recently, so I agree with you on all these points.
Couple of things. Number one, I'm hoping that at some point in time, and I've been asking this for a while, but I'm not sure what the proper format is to present it is. I really would like to see, we have a lot of programming that we run, okay? Whether it be tennis, pickleball, softball, volleyball. I never see it like who's generating what, right? Because right now, and I'm leading the witness, because I know that, because I'm out there, I see the ridiculous amount of people that are playing pickleball and how much it's being used and how much the community's out there. But what's the revenue generation there? What does it look like?
Right.
Because if we're going to be making decisions going forward on what we do with programming and how we do it, we should know at least what the numbers are.
Right.
So just an overall view of what it is, I think it'd be important as far as a line item goes. And then the next thing I think I brought it up last week, is that you got a lot on your plate between just the stuff we're talking about right now. Should the library be separated out from what these duties are structurally? So from a structural standpoint, it was combined at one time during COVID for a reason of cost reduction. That's the only thing I can think of. Well, that's the only reason why it was done, though. It never in the history of the city was it run like that before. Does it need to be run like that now? Do you need a separate director for library, or can it be run with the personnel that we have there right now? I would like to see what that looks like, because this is too big of a job for one director. It's just too much, to be able to be concerned with that. And you have great staff at the library. They're terrific over there. So I would like to see what that really should look like. So I think really combining it with all, we're kind of asking for you to come back and say, okay, based on what we're dealing with, I think this is the best way to structure this. Not us to tell you what to do, but maybe to come back and say, this is what I need.
I'd be glad to do that.
And I'm going to add to that, one of the things you always look at when you streamline for efficiency, is outward facing versus inward facing. Parks and Recs programming, outward facing. Library, outward facing. Park maintenance, inward facing. So it's really sometimes hard for someone to do both outward and inward facing. So to Lance's point, you know, another option would be keep maybe the parks and libraries stay together, but the park maintenance goes somewhere else. So it's, because that's inward facing. And so it's different because you want to optimize your efficiencies and you want to optimize your expertise. And we have programming, optimization at the library, at the parks. They're very similar. It's outward facing, maintenance, inward facing. So just put a seed in there to think about that, because that's how you want to look at it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm good. Yes, thank you.
Got it.
Just to finish up recreation and parks, as you already know, that the aquatics manager will be added back in, and also we're just correcting the part-time hours for the various rec leader and lifeguard positions. And then the last division, library. So library's budget for next year is $2.8 million. Personnel is going up 12%, and M&O is going up 14%. On their personnel side, the reason that big increase is really because there's no 5% vacancy rate that's added to their budget, being that they are fully staffed there. On the M&O side, there's some various items that they're asking for. Most of it is coming from developer impact fees, and mostly the old developer, if not all old developer impact fees, because those aren't restricted. They're asking for $30,000 for some replacement of chairs and tables. $22,000 out of their professional technical budget. $15,000 of it is for their departmental strategic planning. That's actually utilizing old developer impact fees. They're also asking for $4,000 for their children's program planning, and $3,000 for cataloging. And lastly, they're asking $9,000 for some children's computers to be replaced, and that's using old developer impact fees. Their overall
Can I ask a quick
Yes.
question about what the library strategic planning is?
Yes, so we have been working as a citywide, obviously, with Mr. Garcia, who's doing the citywide strategic plan, and staff have suggested, and this is part of us being library, parks, and rec, that maybe because we're such a big department, we need to have him work with us on a specific strategic plan. And because we have these development impact fees there, this is something we thought would be a good use, so we can really come in. And it's really just speaking to kind of what we're talking about, all these different, wheels, and how do we come together, and how do we really, hone in on what we want to do. And staff really liked working with Mr. Garcia and thought it might be a good opportunity for us.
Okay, that's in his wheelhouse, because I think of him as a strategic planning facilitator, not necessarily an org structure efficiency expert.
Well, so he would help us on once we get structured, then where are we going? How do our priorities align, et cetera? How are we not?
But wouldn't it be better to get someone that's really focused on programming and focused on outreach, communications? Because to Drew's point, he's really structural for cities. We're doing outreach to communities.
I see what you're saying.
I mean,
we could look at others.
I think it would be you should, before you to look for other opportunities because it's the outreach. Because one of the things, as the library continues to change, with less books and what is it, it's really becoming a programming facility. And that's what I was going to ask you. We did the remodel of the library, 2-3 years ago now?
I've been here for 2 years, so it had to have been before that.
So, we took out all those books and redesigned that the top floor, the lounge area. Have we been optimizing that area? Like I know we did that complete remodel. Now, what did we find as a result of that? Is the space being facilitated, optimized as much as possible? And that's why I think maybe using someone that has like a programming expert to come in and give you insights about how you could be using that space what you could be doing with it, what outreach programming, that to me is where I would think $15,000 would be better spent.
Well, what, just so I can make a correction, the $15,000 will come from this division budget, but it would be for the entire department's strategic planning. So
Okay.
it would be rec, park, and libraries, and how are we operating together? I still hear your point and think it's a good one. Maybe we look at other facilitators
Yeah,
as
I mean,
options.
$15,000 for, it's a lot
Mhm.
for a couple days strategic planning.
Right.
I'll do it for you free.
And we may, and if we're gonna go, look for others, we may be able to get that. He was just the first person we engaged, because staff really liked working with him. He already has an idea of what the council's priorities are, and we thought he could just provide a little bit more of a plan internally for us, because we are so forward, reaching.
All righty, thank you. Thanks, Alan, appreciate it.
Okay, and there's positions are just a decrease in their just hourly hours for their part-timers, just a slight decrease going into next year. And with that said, that covers all our departments, and we are at our last section of our presentation is for the proposed 5-year capital improvement program. We did provide an Exhibit E with the attachment with the agenda that gives you the 5-year forecast. I do have hard copies for you, council, if you do want to see a hard copy. If I don't see a head nodding, so I'll just continue on. But regards to CIP, here are some projects, CIPs that will be either completed or soon to be completed, and it's just listed out right here. If you, let me know if you have any questions.
I got one question, Paul's probably for Elias. The Smoky Hollow parking pilot project, is that to roll it out through the rest of Smoky Hollow, or what's the plan there?
My hope is that we would be able to extend that, because I have been receiving a very positive input from the adjacent businesses. There was one slide question where there was a little area between the curb and the wheel stops that trapped leaves and trash, but I got with my colleague, Director Mancini, and we worked that out because the sweepers could not get to the gutter to take care of the trash. But other than that, we have received positive input. We plan to do a survey, and I think we're going to be recommending to expand the program to do the other streets.
So those are in lieu fees, right? Parking in lieu fees?
Pardon me?
Those are parking in lieu fees, are they not?
That is correct.
So
Yes.
they're not really coming from our general fund set aside. Those are funds that can only be used for parking programs.
Yes, unless the city council would be willing to spend more money for landscaping and redoing the pavement and, doing first-class renovation, rehab of the roadways, then we'll come back to city council with those options and the cost, and it would be up to city council, how do you want us to proceed?
How, do we have enough money in the parking and lieu program to do the one-way streets and angle parking through Smoky Hollow? To what extent, I guess, is the question.
At this time, I don't think we have that money there, but we don't know till a few months from now how much money potentially will we have. We don't know that, but we'll come to the city council with how much budget or the balance is, and what would it take to do what options. We bring it all to the city council for your consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Elias, can I ask on this list of projects,
Yes,
where
sure.
does the Hilltop Park renovation fall in?
The Hilltop renovation is, these are the ones that are to be completed soon. So the Hilltop is under design. We broke that project into 2 phases. The phase 1 is to make the, to go by and make the most efficient fill-in, if you would. We didn't want to go back and remove all the concrete. What we decided to do was to create some holes in the bottom of the concrete, so when it rains, the water could go through, and not necessarily remove a lot of concrete. We just need to remove some of the concrete along the perimeter of the reservoir, and then be able to fill it in and bring it to the grade, and then at that point, the drainage had to be taken care of under consideration. So that would be the phase one. Phase two, we would like to go back to Rec and Park Commission and City Council ultimately as to what else is needed, what kind of use we're gonna get out of that green space, because based on the use, you're gonna have a different types of fence that is needed. And so we're gonna do that under the second phase, once we know the land use of the area. But the design is almost 50% done. Surely after it's done, we're gonna go through the process of advertising and filling it in. Should be done before end of this year, before December. I expect that to be done, in the fall. And then we'll come back and with the second phase, which is what the land use is, what other amenities are needed, what kind of fence we need, irrigation, and all of that.
Okay, all right, thank you. So,
Sure.
understood.
At what point in time do we start considering the concept of, for safety element, of kind of a comprehensive surveillance, cameras, whatever, at Rec Park and some of these places? Because no sooner do we get the bathrooms done than they're vandalized. I think you're repairing them basically every week. I mean, it's going to end up costing more in repairs than it did to build it before we're long. And at some point in time, there has to be some recourse here.
So I've been working with Director Calderon, and we've actually installed cameras not only at the checkout building, we've now looked at the teen center, Campus El Segundo, outside of Joslin. So we are expanding our security cameras rapidly. He's really made this a priority based on these issues we're having. So we are headed in that direction.
But can we also let the public know that we're having these issues? Because, I mean, because I just think that some parents may not realize that who's really doing some of this vandalism.
We could potentially do like a PR campaign about the increased security cameras and kind of what we're doing to address these issues.
I think that's wise, because I think there's a little bit of out of sight, out of mind kind of going on with the parents. Because I know that there's some damage done with e-bikes on some of the playgrounds, riding on the turf, riding on the slides, using it as ramps. And the damage costs, the taxpayer money. And I think there's sometimes parents are a little bit unaware.
Right.
And I hate e-bikes because, I think e-bikes are amazing. But we just also need to ensure that parents are clear, there's clear understanding of where some of this vandalism is coming from.
I think we can do that, and I can work with the chief on that, because I know they're doing a lot of enforcement and education, but we can tie it directly to the park and what we're doing in the park. I think that's a good idea.
One thing I'd like to add, one of the stalls, I believe it's women's bathroom at the checkout building, that there has been some issues with the flushing components and the valves, and we are working diligently with the contractor to come back and replace that, because it's really not a maintenance issue, it's the way that they install that. So it's been going back and forth, and we are working with them, and we have gotten them back to take care of that. So I just wanted you to know that issue is not vandalism. It's something that we are working on at no charge to the city. They're gonna replace that valve. Just want to let you know.
And since you talked about the women's bathroom, just above there is the air conditioning unit is leaking and it's rotting the roof. Did that get fixed?
The air conditioning was not part of the
Because
construction.
it's rotting the roof.
Yeah.
It's the women's bathroom, right? Or the men's side?
The roof
And
is
it's-
leaking?
The-
Okay, we'll.
Can we just take care of that? Because
We'll-
it's just dripping, dripping, dripping.
Okay, I'll look into that. I wasn't, we are working on that, you saying? I wasn't aware of that, but I'll look into that for sure, yeah.
All right, in regards to just future CIP projects, We have quite a bit of CIP projects, as you are aware, Council. Currently, we are anticipating to carry over $24 million worth of various CIPs that are not going to be finished this year. That's going to be moving over to next year. Of course, the big project is the plunge. That's part of that $24 million. In the new projects, we're anticipating or proposing $18 million worth of new projects, and the various funding sources that are applied to this $18 million. The transportation fund is mostly just gas tax, metro funding for most of the road work. That's $5.9 million. 5.5 is the enterprise funds, the water and wastewater projects. And the proposed special revenue funds, that's a little less than $1 million. The list, of course, corresponds with your 5-year forecast. That's the exhibit, was it G, I believe it was. And then $400,000 for stormwater fund appropriations. And lastly is the $5.2 million of general fund CIPs. So a total of $42 million going into next year's budget. The last slide I have for you is just the breakout of what the general fund proposed CIP projects are. These are the various projects that are listed on your forecast. Main project, of course, is the Rec Park Projects Phase 1 reserve that we want to set aside, that $4 million for this project. And then, of course, the various other projects. I do have Public Works Director with me to answer any specific questions if you have.
The banner poles replacement, is that to improve functionality, or are they broken? What's the issue there?
The bottom part of the pole is rusted out. It's total reinstallment because God forbid, any moment, if you put too much load on it, it may just break and fall. So we are replacing that. There's 4 of them, 2 sets, one on either side of Main Street.
So instead of just replacing them, can we just make sure that we need them? Like, just, let's rethink it. Is that the best use of $300,000? Is there a better way? I mean, who uses the banners? Should we be, I just don't want to spend $300,000 just because we always had banners.
Right.
Maybe we challenge ourselves, do we need the banners, or is there some other way to communicate to the public?
So those are the banners that are hanging over Main Street.
Right. And we charge people to use them, correct?
We do charge people to use them. They need to get a permit through Elias's shop. And we have community groups use them when there's a special event in town. We have banners. We use it for ESPD recruiting. We have a lot of different banners that go up there. Community banners.
But we also have the banners along the main street, right? The
Correct.
So I just want to make sure we're not just doing something because that's what we've always done, and that's a good use of $300,000. So sure, what do you guys think?
I would like us to reconsider that as well. Yeah. Stuck out to me for sure.
300, it's, to make those banners, it's very expensive. Someone who runs events, we don't use them because it is expensive, and I'm not sure it's a good use of money. So I'm not sure, I think maybe our policy on using the little banners down Main Street maybe need to be readdressed to allow people to use that as advertising, or like as long as it fits a certain criteria, rather than putting $300,000 into a banner that actually costs us money, because even though people pay, it's just to cover the cost of the maintenance to go do it.
Yeah, we would have to implement the same policy that we're currently using for the over-the-street banners.
I just think
to allow different community groups to have it, nonprofit groups. It couldn't be advertising per se.
So I think we should reevaluate that.
Well, maybe there's I don't know, Elias, is there a way to refurbish the existing poles and shore them up rather than just buying 4 new ones?
We certainly could look at that, get the engineer involved. This 300,000 is just a budget, but once we get an engineer involved, we might be able to do something fancy, put a sleeve and maybe reduce the cost of rehabbing what we have. We could look at that, but this is just purely budget purposes at this time.
I mean, do we need the banners?
I can't help but wonder if we had our own electronic board, what that would cost us that's more permanent nature and easier to program somewhere. That's a lot of
Yeah.
money for a banner contraption.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the only one.
Anti-banner?
No, it's just they're expensive and and a lot
No,
of
I
people
get it.
don't.
I'm just seeing if you can get a consensus
Yeah.
to be a non-banner Main Street anymore. You've got the mayor on board.
How about we get staff to look at some alternative options? You might come back and say it's cost
Yeah.
prohibitive, or it might say we could put a $150,000 weatherproof panel up right there and basically get similar results.
We will. Sure. We'd be glad to look at that.
And then, the downtown beautification for $65,000. That's just maintenance, right?
This $65,000, no, this would pay for some more lighting.
Okay, so, the lighting, I'm having a hard time with the lighting because we had just talked about lighting as part of, where was it? What budget was it in?
So it was in the city manager's budget,
City
and we moved
manager's
it over to
budget.
Public Works.
And then we talked about using arts and culture money.
Right.
So I just want to make sure we're not we're doing it well the first time and.
Yeah. So there were two components to the banner, or to the lighting. One was an arts component, which is $45,000 that was budgeted through the ACC. And that's still sitting there because we haven't decided what to do for an art project related to lighting. But the other component of it was to add additional lighting to the downtown area. And so we found these solar lamps that we've installed at the 400 block, and this additional funding is to install those same solar lamps all the way down Main Street.
Because it is very dark at night. Our main street is very dark.
Yes.
And then the $40,000 from the arts and culture is more decorative, like to add a decorative component.
Yes.
I mean, I go down to these lovely cities, they have these lights and beautification, and I know I've been asking this for a while, so I just want to
You know,
make sure the 40,000 is enough to do something spectacular.
So I want to correct myself before I answer that question. This year, with the $45,000 that we have, we're going to do all of Main Street. So we've done 400, and this year
So
we'll
just
do
the solar lights. So
just the
there's
solar
no
lights.
decorative.
So then the decorative piece, yeah.
Called to come to El Segundo via lights.
So we met with the ACC, two representatives from the ACCs, and sat down with them and asked them what they wanted to do in terms of an art or a decorative light installation, and they are now pondering that, and they're going to come back to us with a proposal.
And then I do want to eventually talk about the quad here, what do we call it, the Civic Center? You know, how do we reimagine that to become more of a draw for our residents? You know, you go to the Point, you go to the Manhattan Mall, they put a little bit of fake grass in there with some lounge chairs and some anorak chairs, and miraculously, it's full. And so I don't think it would cost a ton of money to reimagine the Civic Center. Could we put that on? I know we have a lot of other projects, but I think we should really start to re-engage this Civic Center. It's a great space that we're not optimizing. Does anyone have a taste for it?
I would agree. I just sat there with my son and all of our dogs yesterday, and I was like, this is awesome. Sun was out. It was a little windy, but it's dark. It's a whole bunch of concrete and utilitarian picnic benches. And I agree we could make it more beautiful if we can find the money. I'd like to make one more. I know Ryan wants to speak really quickly. What are we going to do about I know this is largely driven by the chamber, but we have all of these stones out here, many of which are fading, which is kind of sad because we've got legacy families in town and you can't even read. What are we going to do about that? Do we have money set aside for that? Is it fully funded by chamber? How can we help them? It just looks pretty bad in parts of town. And the steam washing that we've been doing, the steam cleaning, has worsened the situation, unfortunately. It's made the sidewalks better in some cases, but it's eliminated the writing in a lot of cases.
And the sidewalking, the sidewalk itself is, when we did it, it never looked great.
Yeah.
It just looks hodgepodge at this point.
So about a couple of years ago, I contacted the Chamber of Commerce and talked to Marcia. And if my memory serves me correct, prior to me coming to El Segundo, there was an on-call contract that she would call upon, and they would come and they would take out that cylinder with the name and remove it and replace that with a new cylinder with that name. And they had, in fact, a few of those old size because the size changed, you know, the diameter changed. But they had still some. But that contract went away, and the chamber has not actively engaged that contractor. They've gone out of town. They no longer, I don't think they exist. So if the city council wishes, we could start communicating with chamber and bring that program back on. It takes money and staff time because she told me she doesn't have a staff to deal with that.
I think, I think, Elias, that whether or not we maintain it, it's a problem that we're gonna have to address. So my point in bringing it up is that at some point in the future, this will become a CIP project if the chamber doesn't take it on because it just doesn't look good. And I also think, I think it was like 250 a stone, does that seem right? I think people in town would pay more than that to replace their stone or to whatever. I think we could find some funds that way, but either the chamber is gonna help us with it or it's gonna be our problem, but at some point we're gonna have to deal with it.
I think the chamber would help with selling the stones and getting the families involved and having them produce, but as far as long-term maintenance, that's not something that's been considered. So that would be something that we'd probably have to take on.
And maybe there's an alternative, like you dedicate a wall somewhere in town or something, and you honor people and families, some of which people have passed that are on there, and you put their name on a wall as an alternative. But there should be some consideration given to that, I would think.
Okay, sure.
Ryan, did you have something? Looked like you were gonna.
Oh, just to Carol's point about the Civic Plaza, about maybe 2.5 years ago, there were some college kids in a design class that came to the planning commission, and they all had their own kind of concepts of what they would do with this space. So I think we can ask staff to reach out to that professor to take a look at those plans that they made, but maybe he wants to engage his class again, and we can get free design courses from these kids. And there were some pretty good ideas with planes and butterflies and how to just activate this cinder block area out here to make it more inviting.
I mean, it's just the center of our town, and we need to, even if we don't spend a ton of money, but I think we could invest just to activate it. One of our big things is to bring commerce back to downtown, and we have a lot of activation with the restaurants, you know, south of here, but the north, this side, if we could just reactivate that, get walkability, you know, and then one of the things we talked about is, do we do every other month or month in this, a couple days in the summer, like block the main street on the Thursday and do this is or Friday and do this is a walkable street on a Friday night or whatever, you know, come up with some programming, but we have to have the activation of the Civic Center before we can do something like that. But I just think, you know, bring your kids out to ride your bikes on Main Street on a Friday night in the summer, some type of program to bring people back to town. I think we need to, those are the things we need to be starting to do. And that goes back to my outward versus inward for Parks and Recs. If we had programming that invited the town to come to downtown, I think it would be well received.
So what we could do is we could increase that $65,000 for downtown beautification and include the plaza improvements, the sidewalk, the memorial stones, and maybe more lighting at the plaza. We need really more lighting at night at the plaza.
The plaza is very dark.
Right, exactly. So we could increase that amount of money, or you know, maybe do it.
I would separate the stones. That's a totally.
Okay.
Activation of the plaza. The stones would be a separate. That's another big project. But reactivation of the plaza.
Yeah.
Come up with, you know, but I would just love for us to be putting programming and things and to bring people to downtown.
Yeah. Is it the council's pleasure to have that done in this coming fiscal year, 24-25, or do they want to plan it for the next fiscal year?
I think we're gonna, Daryl's gonna come back with some budget changes after this, and let's see where we end up. Let's put it in there, and when we look at the list.
We'll talk about
more
some numbers
comprehensively.
associated with this.
Okay.
Elias.
We'll have to we're gonna have to make some tough decisions, I think.
Sure, thank you.
And in that downtown, the activation, I want people to start thinking about moving the front door of the police station to Main Street, what that would cost. I don't know. Would it, just, no, just move the lobby to the front.
Okay. All right. Really, that actually concludes the budget study session. It seems like, from what I gather, now look towards city manager, it seems like we might have one additional budget study session before the adoption because of these various items that came up during the meeting. And I'll look towards city manager.
Yes, based upon a lot of feedback this afternoon, thank you. I've been taking meticulous notes, as I'm sure each department head has. The main direction, or at least the main discussion, was revolved around the roughly $7.7 million, what was it, what was the line item you called it?
Unassigned fund.
Unassigned fund balance that I think the council felt was a little aggressive or ambitious or overly positive. So we will go back and really even, if what I heard, flatline that number. So there will be, we will just use the numbers the revenue numbers that we have, the actual numbers that we have this year, and then come back and look at budget, how to accommodate that. And we'll come back with some new numbers that are based upon that actual number. I think it's 92 million versus the 98 or the 96. So yes, if we can do another study session, and I'll work with Mashia and your calendars between now and June 4th to specifically go over that, and then some of the other additional items that you brought up for each department. And then we can have a good discussion then on that, and then obviously we'll come back on the 4th for adoption.
And I think for me, the messaging is, and if I've heard the council, we did our 5 strategic goals, and we've capital improvement, number 1, safety, number 2. We want to make sure that if we have expansion or spending more dollars, that those are focused spends and not just spread and creep. We don't want to just creep and spread just because, there's some additional money to spread departments. We want focused spends. So and to like Lance's point to Parks and Recs, the challenge of Parks and Recs is, come and give us a strategic plan of what you think it should look like. We will look at that, but we just don't want it to spread just because, and nothing changes. We want focused spend and not just spread and creep.
Yep.
This has been great. I just want to thank everybody. Tough discussions, tough decisions, but one of the most important, if not the most important activity we do year-round to get everyone aligned on the same outcomes. And it's really important that this is done in public. And so I appreciate everybody on staff being open-minded and not flinching when we're up here saying what we need to do. We really appreciate it, and we know you have a hard job, all of you. We're not taking that lightly.
Absolutely, that's the purpose of a budget workshop, study session. It was very productive and helpful, so thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.